Rowan's life kicks off in the worst possible way. The kid grows up inside a system that honestly does not give a damn whether someone is a child or a grown adult. If you are weak, the place will chew you up and spit you out without blinking. Living in the shady ActionToon shelter quickly opens his eyes to how messed up things really are.
Huh?
The longer Rowan stays there, the more he understands that the whole charity image is mostly a scam. Behind the nice words and fake sympathy, the shelter basically runs a cheap labor hustle. Kids get pushed onto the streets to beg while the adults sit back, collect the money, and pretend they are doing noble work. It is a dirty setup and everyone knows it, yet nobody bothers fixing it. Growing up in that environment forces Rowan to toughen up fast. The boy stops trusting people easily and starts watching everything around him. Every day in that place hardens him a little more, turning a quiet kid into someone sharp enough to survive a seriously messed up world. One cold night, a worn-out woman shows up at the ActionToon shelter while traveling with a small boy, and she asks the owner for a place to stay. The man immediately throws up a wall and claims the shelter is already packed with too many people. However, his stubborn attitude suddenly softens when the woman quietly places a single silver coin in front of him, and that tiny piece of metal somehow performs a miracle on his sense of generosity. Funny how compassion suddenly wakes up once money clears its throat. The owner finally lets them in and lazily leads them to a cramped little room where they can sleep for the night. Then he waves his hand like the situation solved itself, and explains that the rules and fees will be handled in the morning, since the hour is late and his patience clearly clocks out after sunset. Helen gently helps the child sit on the bed, and she looks at him with heavy sorrow because the boy has already walked through more trouble than someone his age should even recognize. The child softly asks where his mother and father are, and the question lands like a blade. Helen cannot bring herself to drop the brutal truth on him, so instead, she offers a careful lie and tells him he will see his parents again very soon. The boy accepts those words without resistance and soon drifts into sleep, calm and unaware. Meanwhile, Helen suddenly begins coughing violently, and the cough quickly turns ugly as blood appears with every breath. The moment stretches long enough for her to realize the obvious truth that her body is losing the fight. With the last bit of strength she still controls, she whispers a quiet goodbye toward the sleeping child and then collapses beside the bed as silence settles in. Later that night, the boy wakes up and the first thing he notices is the bedsheets soaked with blood. He slowly turns toward Helen and the realization crawls into his mind piece by piece until it becomes impossible to ignore. She is gone. The room stays cold and still, like the world has already moved on without bothering to pause. Not long after, the shelter owner returns with his mistress and both react with irritation instead of sympathy because a dead guest inside the shelter is apparently bad for business. The mistress notices the boy's light-colored hair and casually mentions that it looks similar to Pauline's, a woman who has been staying at the shelter for some time. Almost as if the story has perfect timing, Pauline appears right at the doorway. The mistress quickly decides the situation is now Pauline's responsibility. The ActionToon shelter proudly claims it survives through charity and government aid while presenting itself as a safe haven for the homeless. However, the truth sitting behind those polished words tells a different story because the place quietly profits by forcing children to beg on the streets while charging them so-called responsibility fees. In simple terms, the poor are expected to pay rent just to remain poor, which sounds almost impressive if cruelty had a business model. Pauline introduces herself and gently asks the boy for his name, yet Rowan stays silent because his thoughts remain locked inside the memory of Helen's death. Pauline notices the tension on his face and sits beside him. Then she calmly explains that whatever happened before now belongs to the past while surviving tomorrow demands courage and a little hope. She reaches out her hand and encourages him to move forward. Rowan quietly takes it and that small moment begins a new chapter in his life. From that point, Rowan pretends to be Pauline's son while they beg together on the streets, a new survival skill unlocked in the harshest way possible. Their relationship begins out of necessity, yet Pauline genuinely cares for him, and her quiet kindness slowly becomes a shield against the loneliness pressing around him. Because of her presence, Rowan never feels completely abandoned, and time keeps moving forward until 5 years pass like a fast chapter skip, almost like nobody bothered to subscribe just to watch those years. Rowan, now 8 years old, when he hears that Pauline may soon leave the shelter, because she receives an offer to work as a maid in a noble household. Rowan congratulates her and says she will surely be an excellent maid, but as Rowan remembers how she protects him when other children bully him and supports him during difficult days, tears begin sliding down his face like a drama queen. He wants to be happy for her, yet the thought of losing another important person hurts deeply. Pauline comforts him and explains that people do not truly disappear just because they are far away, because loneliness only exists when the heart forgets love. She tells him that whenever he feels lonely, he should close his eyes and listen to his heart because the people who care about him will always remain there. Sometime later, Rowan stands alone in a quiet forest at night and remembers her words, so he closes his eyes and places his hand over his chest while trying to feel the presence of those he loves. The moment he does this, something strange happens as mana begins swirling around him like an invisible wind, and even with closed eyes, he suddenly senses everything around him as if the world itself becomes visible. More than that, he feels the presence of his parents, Helen, and Pauline close to his heart, and for the first time in a long while, the lonely boy does not feel quite so alone. Many years pass. Again, that familiar subscription problem with time skipping forward like nobody bothered to stick around and watch the quiet chapters. After Pauline leaves the shelter, she never contacts Rowan even once. Not a letter, not a visit, not even the courtesy of pretending to remember him. As a result, Rowan grows up begging alone, just like the other children trapped inside the Tung-Toon shelter system. However, his situation turns out slightly better than most, because the director assigns him to Zone 1, which happens to be the best begging area in the city. Generous passers-by regularly move through that district, and they tend to drop coins without too much hesitation, mostly because charity feels easier when it happens during a comfortable stroll. Because of that lucky placement, Rowan earns more money than most of the other children, and naturally the shelter treats him a little better, since profit has always been the fastest way to earn kindness in places like that. The supervisor responsible for Zone 1 is Blake Hyung, a man who acts unusually friendly toward Rowan from the beginning after hearing about the boy's tragic history. Blake speaks kindly to him more often than expected and sometimes throws in small pieces of advice that actually sound useful instead of empty sympathy. Blake also becomes the one who explains the strange glowing cluster Rowan sometimes sees whenever he closes his eyes. According to Blake, that mysterious light is mana, the invisible energy that quietly forms the foundation of the entire world. People unknowingly breathe in mana every single day, and this constant breathing slowly influences the natural flow of energy moving through their bodies. However, only a small group of individuals can actively use mana, and they achieve that ability through special training methods known as mana cultivation. Blake himself belongs to that rare group. Rowan can clearly see the condensed mana circulating inside Blake's body, like a faint glowing current moving beneath the skin. Blake is also a skilled swordsman who strengthens his movements with mana, although Rowan eventually notices something slightly unsettling about Blake's energy because it carries a darker and murkier glow instead of the clean, bright aura he expected. Blake warns Rowan very clearly never to attempt mana cultivation alone without proper knowledge, because one careless mistake could easily turn dangerous. Meanwhile, life continues moving through its usual routine. One day, Rowan sits in his regular begging spot with a small bucket resting in front of him, while people passing by occasionally drop coins inside. He politely thanks every person who shows him kindness. Some passing ladies find the boy's gentle face and bright hair incredibly adorable, and that detail quietly boosts his income because generosity tends to increase dramatically whenever something looks cute enough to melt a few wallets. While sitting there, Rowan continues practicing his strange ability to see mana. He tries to observe both the normal world and the flowing energy around it at the same time, which turns out much harder than expected because the overlapping visions constantly make him dizzy. After several attempts, he finally manages to balance the two views together, although the effort still leaves him tired and lightheaded. Blake suddenly appears and looks impressed by the number of coins already filling Rowan's bucket. He casually reminds Rowan to report anything suspicious immediately, before walking away like a man who prefers problems handled early. Rowan actually notices something suspicious already, although he keeps quiet. Yesterday, he spotted two strangers moving through the crowd. Their bodies carried powerful condensed mana, similar to Blake's, yet their energy shined much brighter. The men watched Rowan carefully before suddenly disappearing by leaping across rooftops like gravity was merely a polite suggestion rather than a rule. Rowan stays silent because revealing his ability to see mana would invite more trouble than he needs. Later that day, his coin container finally fills to the top, so he begins walking back toward the base camp to exchange it for an empty one. However, as he moves through the streets, he suddenly notices several men following him, and their bodies carry the same powerful glowing mana as the strangers from yesterday. Panic slowly creeps into his mind until Blake suddenly appears like a flying hero charging forward at unbelievable speed. In one smooth motion, Blake grabs Rowan in his arms and leaps high into the air, landing on a nearby rooftop like rooftop jumping is simply part of his daily workout. The mysterious men immediately chase after them, so Blake moves even faster in what feels like full speed mode, while telling Rowan to hold on tightly and also not to drop the coins because money cannot buy happiness, but it definitely buys food. Eventually, they reach the shelter where Blake places Rowan back on the ground. The boy stands there quietly, lost in thought, while Blake assumes fear has stolen his voice. Blake calmly tells him the danger has passed before sending him inside. However, Rowan is not silent because of fear. During their escape, he carefully observes how mana flows through Blake's body during movement. He sees the energy gather in bursts within the arms and legs, strengthening each step and jump. He even notices the exact pattern of mana releases needed to leap from rooftop to rooftop. Excited by this discovery, Rowan decides to try it himself. He slowly breathes in mana, guides it through his body, condenses the energy, and prepares to release it with precise control. At that moment, the small boy finally understands how mana truly works. Rowan's new discovery about mana lights up his mind with excitement, and like any guy who just stumbled onto a dangerous new toy, he immediately wants to test it out. The urge to experiment sits heavy in his chest. However, before he can actually try anything, the routine across the city suddenly breaks. The other children, begging in different zones, receive orders to return to the shelter right away. Nobody explains the reason, and that silence naturally fills the building with nervous whispers and half-baked theories because confusion spreads faster than truth in a place like this. When everyone finally gathers inside the shelter, Rowan Sr. arrives looking calm enough to sell the idea that nothing serious is happening. He explains that the situation is routine and tells the children to stop worrying. According to him, they should quietly wait inside their rooms while the zone leaders complete an inspection. Everything will supposedly return to normal soon. Most of the children receive those exact instructions. However, Rowan gets something different. Apparently, the boy just unlocked a premium membership. Instead of returning to a room, he is told to pack his belongings because he is being transferred somewhere else. A short while later, Rowan walks through the shelter behind his senior, keeping a few steps of distance while silence stretches between them. Eventually, the senior pauses and asks Rowan to stand aside while he speaks with a large guard waiting nearby. Curiosity immediately wakes up inside Rowan, so he quietly circulates mana through his body and focuses that energy around his ears. His hearing sharpens instantly and begins working like a pair of expensive wireless receivers. The distant whispers suddenly grow clear and loud, almost like the two men are standing right next to him instead of across the hallway. The conversation revolves around Rowan. Apparently, he is being moved into the main building rather than staying in the dormitories with the other begging children. Even the senior admits he does not know the full reason, although he guesses the director personally approves of the boy. Hard work and a handsome face apparently go a long way in places where appearances still hold value. Considering the suspicious men seen earlier in Zone 1, the shelter may also want him somewhere safer. The senior casually mentions that those strangers might belong to something called the Union. Rowan instantly recognizes the connection. Those men are the same figures who followed him earlier that day. Not long after, the guard waves Rowan forward and signals him to follow. They walk through several corridors inside the main building before arriving at a reception counter where Amy waits calmly. The guard instructs Rowan to greet her and explains that she will now be responsible for him. Once the guard leaves, Amy begins explaining the situation. Starting tomorrow, she will teach Rowan everything he needs to know. During lessons, he should call her teacher, although outside of class, he can call her big sister. While talking, she studies his face more carefully and casually notes that he looks surprisingly handsome for someone raised in the dormitories. Rowan simply asks why learning to read even matters. Amy explains that the shelter frequently hosts reading events for wealthy guests and respected patrons. During these gatherings, a child reads a book aloud while the audience listens, and nobles apparently enjoy that kind of entertainment more than anyone should reasonably admit. Children who read especially well sometimes receive invitations from sponsors, and those private meetings occasionally lead to adoption. Unfortunately, Rowan cannot read at all yet, which means a long road of work sits ahead of him. After the explanation, Amy leads him to his new room where he meets Theo, Noah, Hayden, and Lily. Their small group manages books and maintains the shelter's library, and they welcome Rowan warmly, because another pair of hands always helps when the job pays absolutely nothing. Later that day, Rowan practices reading inside the library and surprisingly finishes several beginner books rather quickly. Soon his curiosity drifts toward Zone 2, where unfamiliar titles fill every shelf around him. Each book looks tempting, although one title suddenly pulls his full attention. The book is called The Birth of the Grafton Kingdom in the Union. The word Union feels strangely familiar. Inside the book, Rowan finds a map of the continent along with a history lesson explaining how the region called Grafton once won a massive war. After that victory, the world reorganized itself into one kingdom, divided into 6 self-governing regions. To prevent future wars, the king created an organization known as the Union, a group meant to maintain peace across the land. The Union has existed for more than 200 years and supposedly represents justice. That detail only deepens Rowan's confusion. If the Union protects people, then Blake running away from those men earlier makes little sense. At first, Rowan considers the possibility that the Union might punish the shelter for forcing children to beg. However, another thought slowly forms inside his mind. The shelter and the Union might not be allies at all. If the shelter hides what really happened when those men chased him earlier, then the truth behind it must be far more serious than anyone wants to admit. A few more days pass. Rowan quietly practices his control over mana while doing simple work. He still cannot move perfectly while circulating mana through his body, but the process becomes easier with practice, and he slowly learns how to move, walk, and even read while maintaining the flow of energy. One day, all the children gather in the main hallway where the vice director and Amy stand in front of them to announce the participants for the next reading event. Without wasting time, the vice director begins calling names, and Rowan's friends Theo, Lily, and Noah are all selected, which makes them very happy. When the time comes for Rowan's name, the vice director pauses for a moment because she originally does not want him to participate yet, since he only finishes the fairy tale section recently. However, the boy is undeniably handsome, and even a serious event benefits from a little charm, so she allows him to attend as an observer so he can experience the atmosphere. After the selection, Amy instructs the chosen children to change into formal clothes and meet in the reception hall. Later, Rowan appears wearing new clothes and somehow manages to look both elegant and adorable at the same time, which is a dangerous combination for any audience filled with wealthy ladies. Soon, the special guests begin arriving. Among them is a woman named Caroline, who instantly recognizes Rowan from last winter when she sees him begging at a street intersection. At that time, she already finds the boy charming, and now seeing him dressed nicely only strengthens her admiration. Rowan politely thanks her for the kindness she once shows him by giving him money, which instantly turns Caroline into his most enthusiastic supporter. She excitedly tells the vice director how handsome Rowan looks now and how charming he already appears back when he begs on the streets. The vice director casually mentions that Rowan has also learned to read, and this information excites Caroline even more. She strongly requests that Rowan read something aloud. The vice director initially explains that Rowan only comes to observe, but seeing the guests so interested, she eventually agrees to let him read the final chapter of the session. When Rowan begins reading, the entire room becomes strangely quiet. His voice flows smoothly with a pleasant rhythm that almost feels hypnotic, and before long, the audience listens with deep attention as if the story itself comes alive through his voice. Soon, Rowan finishes reading. The guests shower him with praise and admiration. Caroline immediately requests that he read again tomorrow, and the vice director happily accepts. Later that same day, Rowan returns to the library and begins searching through the shelves for books that might help him combine mana with physical movement more effectively. While browsing, he pulls out one particular book, but before he can read the title properly, Blake suddenly appears behind him. Blake glances at the book and realizes it discusses life's pleasures in a very adult way, which makes the situation slightly awkward because Rowan clearly intends to study mana control, not advanced romance education. Rowan pretends to be startled by Blake's sudden arrival, even though he already senses his presence through mana. Blake praises Rowan for performing so well at the reading event. Then he explains the Union men who chased Rowan earlier are causing trouble again, so he plans to deal with them together with the administrators. Rowan confidently says Blake will surely defeat them, which strangely encourages Blake even more. Before leaving, Blake points to the book Rowan is holding and jokingly suggests he read it after finishing his reading sessions, advice that Rowan silently decides to ignore for the sake of his remaining innocence. Once Blake leaves, Rowan quietly wonders about the conflict between the Shelter and the Union and grows curious about how powerful true mana users might be in battle. More importantly, he wonders how strong he himself has become. He gathers mana through his breathing, circulates the energy through his arms, and focuses on controlling the flow. Unfortunately, his control improves slightly faster than the durability of the poor book in his hands, and with a sudden tearing sound, the book splits neatly into two pieces because the mana greatly amplifies the strength of his grip. Rowan stares at the torn pages in silence, realizing he accidentally destroys a book. After a while, Rowan goes to meet Vice Principal, who tells him since the previous reading event, many noble women become completely fascinated with Rowan's voice and now insist that only he should read for them. Apparently, they care far more about hearing his pleasant voice than about the book itself, which creates a terrible headache for the poor vice director, who must somehow satisfy their demanding requests. She feels reluctant to burden Rowan with so much responsibility, but the boy calmly agrees to help because he appreciates the opportunities the shelter gives him. However, during the next event, when the name of the special reader is announced, everyone prepares to hear Rowan's name, yet instead the vice director calls Theo. The blue-haired boy freezes in shock and stutters with disbelief because even he believes Rowan deserves the honor more. The other children congratulate him anyway, while Theo quietly praises Rowan's elegant reading and confidently predicts that Rowan will someday end up in a wonderful place. Soon, Theo leaves to meet the noble guests, and Rowan watches him go with a small feeling of sadness. Still, the feeling disappears quickly because Rowan immediately returns to his busy routine reading for the audience and once again filling the room with his smooth and poetic voice that leaves the noble women completely delighted. Because Rowan becomes extremely popular, the vice director soon informs him that he must attend both the morning and afternoon sessions every day, which means he now works double shifts like a very small but extremely charming employee. Even the vice director feels slightly guilty for pushing him so hard, but Rowan accepts the situation with gratitude, since he enjoys knowing people appreciate his reading. He does admit that reading with deep emotion leaves him mentally exhausted, so he politely asks for a short break after each session. The vice director agrees as long as he stays inside the backyard area. During one quiet break, Rowan stands alone in the garden and practices controlling mana again. Following the instructions from a book, he concentrates mana into specific parts of his body such as muscles, joints, and bones, then spreads the energy through his entire body using pure willpower. His body briefly glows with flowing mana before returning to normal. The only problem remains his unstable concentration, which still scatters like confused birds instead of gathering properly. Rowan decides not to rush his progress and instead focuses on understanding mana more carefully. He remembers how Blake once carries him across rooftops and realizes even powerful mana users eventually become tired if they waste too much energy. This makes Rowan curious about storing mana or even borrowing energy from the environment. Since he already proves that mana can travel through his voice while reading, he wonders if external mana can also be shaped and controlled. After several quiet experiments, he finally succeeds in making a small leaf float gently into the air. The sight fills him with excitement because it proves his theory works. Meanwhile, the shelter announces another special reader, and this time Lily is chosen. Everyone applauds and wishes her luck, but the shy girl becomes strangely flustered when she stands near Rowan. She tries to confess her feelings for him, yet before the poor girl can finish speaking, the other children begin loudly complaining about the unfair situation. They cannot understand why Rowan, clearly the best reader, is skipped twice. Rowan thinks since special readers often leave the shelter to live with wealthy families, he realizes such an opportunity might allow him to explore the world and learn more about mana, and his curiosity grows stronger. The next day, during another break, Rowan continues practicing his levitation trick when he suddenly senses a strange purple trail of mana approaching the shelter. He looks closer and recognizes the large guard who once escorts him to the main building. The man suddenly collapses heavily onto the ground, and Rowan notices the guard's mana fading rapidly. Another man rushes over and checks his condition while urgently mentioning the Union during their conversation. Rowan quietly overhears everything before the men notice him and firmly tell him to return inside and pretend he sees nothing. Still shocked, Rowan obeys and walks back into the building. Soon after, the afternoon reading session is suddenly canceled without explanation, and all the children are ordered to return to their rooms immediately. The strange order confuses everyone because nothing like this ever happens before. While the children whisper nervously, Amy approaches Rowan and urgently tells him to prepare himself. This time he will be the special reader. While preparing for the important reading event, Rowan feels uneasy about the strange mood around the shelter. Amy speaks to him earlier with a serious tone that lacks her usual warmth, and the memory lingers in his mind like a quiet warning bell. He keeps thinking about the injured guard and the mysterious men who mention the Union, and he suspects those events somehow caused the sudden cancellation of the afternoon reading session. Still unsure about the truth, Rowan finishes dressing and meets Amy, who waits for him in formal clothes as if preparing for an important visit. For a brief moment, she seems impressed by how neat and elegant he looks, but she says nothing and simply instructs him to follow. They travel to another building connected to the shelter called the Annex. Unlike the bright reception halls Rowan knows, this place feels dark and oppressive, like a house that forgets what sunlight looks like. Rowan immediately senses strange mana filling the building, heavy and unpleasant, and the people inside carry suspicious energy that makes his instincts shout warnings. A large guard quickly escorts Rowan inside, while urging them to hurry. Before entering, Rowan glances back at Amy one last time, but her face remains neutral, offering no comfort or explanation. Rowan quietly decides to stay alert in case something dangerous happens. Soon he hears the voice of the vice director and enters a wide chamber that looks disturbingly similar to a ritual altar. Without delay, the adults instruct him to sit down and begin reading. Rowan notices the strange book placed in front of him and also sees a massive pit descending deep into darkness below the floor. At first, he simply feels confused, but then he realizes the truth. The pit contains an enormous concentration of mana, unlike anything he has ever sensed before. The moment he begins reading, he understands that the ritual revolves around his voice. The text describes a gloomy story connected to the dark pit, and as Rowan reads aloud, he feels powerful emotions building inside him. His voice slowly grows darker and heavier, almost as if the pit itself listens to every word. Soon he realizes the terrifying truth: the pit of mana is the real audience. As the reading continues, Rowan feels his own mana draining away with every sentence. His body weakens quickly, and he understands the ritual intends to sacrifice him. However, he also realizes stopping suddenly would only cause chaos and possibly bring the Union directly to the shelter. Instead, he concentrates with all his strength and forms a desperate plan. He begins absorbing the surrounding mana and shaping it for his own protection. White streams of mana swirl around his body and create a protective barrier that stabilizes his strength and prevents further draining. With his control over mana finally improving, Rowan continues reading while secretly delaying the ritual. He uses his mana detection to watch for signs of the Union, hoping someone will arrive before the ritual ends. But the people controlling the ritual grow impatient. Believing something is wrong, several men rush into the chamber. Rowan senses them approaching and prepares himself, yet the situation becomes even stranger when those men ignore him and instead move toward the lower area beneath the chamber. Curious and confused, Rowan quietly follows and looks into the deeper section of the pit. What he sees shatters his world. At the bottom stands a horrifying tree formed from countless sacrificed souls, its branches twisted together from the bodies of people who die in the ritual. Rowan's heart sinks into despair as he realizes how many lives are already lost. Then he notices something that completely breaks him. Among the trapped souls inside the tree is Pauline. At that moment, one of the men notices him and grabs him, while chaos breaks out nearby. Blake suddenly rushes into the chamber, demanding to know why the director and vice director are dead. The ritual leaders explain that the director attempts to escape earlier, and during the chaos, they discover a strange fruit growing on the soul tree. Rowan is brought there to create another fruit, but the ritual unexpectedly fails. Blake listens with visible frustration before walking toward the horrifying tree. Then he calmly pulls his sword out of Pauline's body. The sight freezes Rowan in place. He remembers asking Blake long ago why he never carries a sword, and Blake casually explains that his weapon is being used somewhere else. Now Rowan finally understands Blake is the one who kills Pauline. The realization crushes the last piece of innocence inside Rowan, and the quiet boy who once read stories for noble ladies disappears, replaced by something far darker. Rowan's reaction is immediate and brutal. He kills the man who grabs him. The attack happens so quickly that the victim does not even understand what is happening. At the same moment, Blake is still busy pulling his sword out of the horrible soul tree and completely misses the sudden change behind him. When he finally turns around, the quiet boy he once knows is now surrounded by a dark and powerful aura of mana. Blake stares in surprise because he never expects a child this young to possess such terrifying power. He begins one of his usual arrogant speeches, probably expecting Rowan to listen quietly as always. But Rowan has absolutely no interest in speeches today, and before Blake even finishes talking, the boy moves with frightening speed and attacks him with overwhelming force. Tears fill his eyes, Rowan's. He mourns Pauline, the woman who cares for him like a mother. Rowan places his own mana into the twisted tree made from sacrificed souls, and the moment his mana connects, he is pulled into the collective memories of the victims. Inside those memories, he witnesses terrible scenes, and among these visions, he suddenly sees something strange. For a brief moment, he sees himself as an adult, a grown version of Rowan, who looks exactly like him but older and far stronger. The vision disappears before he can understand it, as if the memory itself refuses to reveal more. Then, another presence appears. He feels the familiar warmth of Pauline's mana. Her gentle voice reminds him to listen to his heart and never forget what truly matters. The moment ends, and Rowan returns to reality. Blake now stands behind him with a sword pressed against his neck, admitting that his subordinates ruined the original ritual plan, but he is still curious about the boy's potential. He offers Rowan a choice. He can come with him or die quietly. Blake explains they would travel to another farm where Rowan would continue working with trees like the one here. Blake would manage the operation, meaning Rowan would officially become part of the secret organization known as the Lutel, a cult that hopes to change the world using dark magic, and Rowan calmly refuses. Blake sighs in disappointment and immediately swings his sword, proving that his former brotherly attitude disappears the moment Rowan stops being useful. Rowan, however, casually stops the deadly strike with 2 fingers, using external mana control. The sight leaves Blake completely stunned. Just then, Rowan quietly asks if Blake is the one who kills Pauline. Blake answers with mocking curiosity, wondering if the boy wants revenge. Rowan responds by snapping the sword in half with pure mana strength and calmly states that Blake will not live to see another day. It is a very cold declaration, especially from a 10-year-old child who technically should still be worrying about homework. The fight ends quickly. Rowan strikes Blake with tremendous force, slices Blake in half, and ends his life. Rowan calmly states that people who destroy innocent lives should not complain when consequences finally arrive. Unfortunately, the day is not finished with him yet. Rowan soon senses more people approaching the underground level of the annex. A group of soldiers enters and begins searching the area carefully. Their leader introduces himself as Oscar, vice captain of the Union's Faith Division. Oscar immediately notices Rowan's strange ability and asks if the boy uses telekinetic magic. Rowan looks confused by the term, so Oscar changes the question and asks if he learns magic from the Lutel cult. Rowan explains he teaches himself how to control mana, which sounds ridiculous coming from a 10-year-old child. The two begin talking. Oscar realizes the boy is extremely observant. Outside the ritual hall, Rowan demonstrates his telekinetic control by lifting a sword through the air, shocking several soldiers. Meanwhile, one of Oscar's subordinates reports that the soul tree is likely created less than 2 years ago. The binding spell has somehow been undone, though no clear mana traces remain. While they discuss the investigation, Rowan quietly looks at the bodies of the sacrificed children. Theo and Lily are among them, and guilt weighs heavily on his heart. Rowan asks if the Union has seen many trees like this, and Oscar explains him everything. Rowan then asks to join the Faith Division and help destroy the Lutel cult. Oscar believes the boy is still in shock from the tragedy, but he also senses genuine resolve. For now, he explains that the Union will conduct a full investigation before deciding Rowan's future. As Rowan prepares to leave the terrible scene, he notices a single coin lying on the dead vice director's body. He quietly takes it before following Oscar and the soldiers away from the ruined annex. After the chaos at the annex, the Union soldiers prepare their official report. According to their observations, there is no serious damage to the Pillar of Faith facilities. 13 members of the evil organization are confirmed dead, along with 3 victims from the shelter. 2 main culprits remain suspects, and one of them appears to be Amy, which surprises many people. The investigators also conclude that the rebel cult leaders only create the ritual area in the beginning. Something else causes the ritual to collapse later, so further investigation is needed to discover the real reason. With the report finished for now, Vice Captain Oscar turns to Rowan and asks where he feels most comfortable talking. Rowan immediately says the library, which is probably the most predictable answer a book-loving child can give. Oscar respects the preference and tells Rowan to lead the way. Soon they sit inside the quiet library and begin discussing everything that has happened. Oscar mentions that even here he cannot find any books explaining mana cultivation, so he becomes very curious about how Rowan learns magic completely on his own. Rowan simply explains that he figures it out by himself. It is the kind of answer that sounds suspiciously simple, but talented people often struggle to explain their natural abilities. Rowan even proudly calls himself smart, which Oscar secretly finds both amusing and believable. Oscar then asks Rowan to explain the events from the beginning, and Rowan patiently describes his life at the shelter and everything that leads to the terrible ritual. After a long discussion, he concludes that Pauline may somehow be responsible for awakening his strange powers. Even after hearing the story, Oscar remains puzzled. Rowan receives no training, yet he defeats 2 rebel members, including Blake, an experienced swordsman. He also breaks the ritual conditions created by a high priest, which is something even skilled mages struggle to do. On top of that, Rowan uses telekinesis without spells or chants and does not even appear tired afterward. To Oscar, the boy looks like a hidden treasure that nobody bothers to notice until now. Rowan then asks about the horrifying tree. Oscar explains that it is a ritual device created by the rebel cult to harvest human life. The goal is to produce a strange fruit made from condensed life energy and mana. Oscar shows Rowan one of these fruits, which forms after the ritual consumes enough victims. When someone eats the fruit, their mana increases dramatically. Because of this, the fruit becomes an extremely expensive item sold on the black market. Rowan then asks about the meaning of telekinesis. Oscar explains it simply means moving objects using mana without touching them. Rowan finally understands that he has been using magic the entire time without realizing it. Rowan wonders if he is too weak or inexperienced to join. Oscar interrupts and explains that life requires more than talent alone. The serious tone immediately makes Rowan look disappointed, which forces Oscar to clarify that the real problem is Rowan's age. The Union usually measures experience by age, not just ability. Rowan asks whether age matters more than skill. The question makes Oscar pause, because the boy clearly shows remarkable talent. Instead of refusing him, Oscar decides to treat the conversation like an interview. He asks why Rowan kills Edgar, even though Edgar is not attacking him at that moment. Rowan calmly explains that Edgar already murders innocent people. Eating would only lead to Rowan's own death. Oscar suggests that anger might influence his judgment, and Rowan agrees his emotions play a role, but he believes emotions sometimes help clarify decisions rather than confuse them. In his view, men who destroy innocent lives no longer deserve mercy. Oscar asks if Rowan truly has the right to kill them. Rowan honestly admits he does not know if he has that right, but at that moment he has the power to stop them. He accepts full responsibility for his actions without excuses. Oscar then asks if killing them is truly necessary. Rowan answers with surprising calmness that some people in society must carry out executions, and organizations like the Union exist partly for that purpose. Oscar realizes the boy understands the harsh reality of their work. He explains that the Union ultimately aims to build a world filled with peace and happiness, even though perfect peace is impossible. Destroying groups like the Lutel cult is part of protecting that ideal future. He also reveals that the Lutel faction is only one branch of a larger evil organization known as the Grave, which threatens the entire kingdom. The Union continues fighting these groups, and Oscar believes Rowan's abilities may become valuable someday. For now, Rowan must travel to the Union headquarters and prove his abilities there before becoming a member. The meeting ends, and outside Oscar announces that the Union has eliminated the dark activities at the Tungtun shelter. Normal operations will eventually resume. Oscar then assigns one of his soldiers, Sienna, to escort Rowan safely to the Union. Rowan notices her bright blue mana aura and learns she is a dark elf. He honestly admits he expects dark elves to have darker energy, which leaves Sienna slightly confused but mildly amused. Rowan gathers his belongings, which turns out to be almost nothing. With a polite farewell to Oscar and the other soldiers, he begins the long 2-week journey toward the Union, stepping into a future that is still full of questions. Rowan and Sienna travel for many days before finally stopping one evening to set up a small camp, and she hands him a small sheath designed to hold the broken blade he carries everywhere. Rowan realizes she has been making a gift for him the entire time. After a while, Rowan, completely unaware that he is causing chaos, starts entertaining himself by spinning the broken blade in the air, using his telekinetic power like a floating toy. Sienna watches carefully and recognizes the unusual ability. Rowan remembers that Vice Captain Oscar calls it telekinetic magic, and he repeats the term with confidence. Sienna agrees that the name works well enough, although she explains it is only a rough description. Rowan's power is actually stranger than normal magic, because he directly controls mana itself, without using chants, spells, or ritual words. She explains that this kind of control resembles a divine power once used by the ancient elves, the very first elven race long before the world divided into many branches. Rowan listens carefully while his spinning blade nearly pokes the campfire, which Sienna gently pushes aside with a sigh. She adds that even his unusual eye color suggests his parents were not ordinary people. The word parents quietly makes Rowan think about his own past, though the thought fades as the next day arrives and their journey finally reaches its destination. The Union headquarters appears more like a bustling town than a military base. As they walk through the streets, Sienna explains that the area is divided into residential zones and commercial zones, where merchants from every race gather. No matter who someone is, they come here to buy supplies, because the Union is the safest and most powerful place on the continent. It earns the nickname Sword and Book of the Continent because warriors and mages work together here to protect the world from dangerous groups like the Lutel cult. Rowan absorbs every piece of information like a very curious sponge with legs. While they explore, a man named Lazarus greets them. He is the director of the Union's management department and shows great interest in the boy. He politely invites Rowan for a private conversation inside an extremely bright room that makes Rowan mentally note that someone clearly enjoys sunlight a little too much. Rowan immediately notices Lazarus possesses the most radiant and perfectly controlled mana aura he has ever sensed. The director gently holds Rowan's hand, and the boy suddenly feels powerful mana pressure. Lazarus is demonstrating incredible control over mana, far beyond Rowan's own skill. Instead of fear, Rowan feels excited to meet someone so skilled. Lazarus notices the small coin Rowan carries. Rowan explains he did not steal it and only reclaimed it because it once belonged to his grandmother. When Lazarus asks to examine it, Rowan suddenly realizes he cannot move at all because the director quietly locks his body using precise mana control. Rowan calmly analyzes the situation and copies the director's technique, adjusting his own mana flow until he finally breaks free. Lazarus looks genuinely impressed, while Rowan secretly thinks he could perform better next time. When the director inspects the emblem on the coin, his mana wavers slightly, a detail Rowan notices instantly. Rowan asks if Lazarus is the strongest person in the Union. The director laughs and jokingly calls himself an old raccoon helping the younger generation. Rowan takes the statement very seriously and spends several seconds wondering why a raccoon is managing a powerful organization. Lazarus then explains that the Union has 17 captains, a powerful commander, a governor, and other leaders far stronger than himself. Satisfied with the explanation, Rowan politely asks if he can visit again for more questions. Lazarus happily agrees as long as the boy schedules an appointment first. After the meeting, Sienna shows Rowan his new home, the Union Academy, a school where the children of Union members study while their parents work on missions. The academy teaches many skills, including magic, swordsmanship, and martial arts, while focusing on basic theories and strong foundations. For Rowan, the idea of finally attending a real school feels incredibly exciting, and for the first time in a long while, both he and Sienna feel hopeful about the future. Rowan arrives at the Union Academy, looking impressive in his new uniform, full of curiosity and excitement. He meets Daphne, who quickly introduces herself as the head of academic affairs and a language teacher, realizing she had forgotten proper introductions earlier. She hands him the first-year class schedule, along with a list of electives covering everything from mana control and swordsmanship to astronomy. Rowan eagerly checks every single subject because he wants to learn it all, thinking of himself as Einstein, ignoring how impossible it might seem. Daphne is shocked by his enthusiasm, warning him that taking so many classes would be overwhelming and that failing any could cause serious problems. But seeing his curiosity and determination, she finally accepts his original plan and suggests they start with the first class. In the classroom, Rowan carefully observes the students around him. Their mana is denser than his own, confirming that his body is still his main limitation, but he remains undaunted. Daphne introduces him as the new student, and Rowan politely introduces himself. His calm, clear, and expressive voice immediately captures the attention of the class, and even touches the teacher, making him feel a sense of accomplishment. He quickly finds a seat, and Daphne begins the lesson from page 24, asking Rowan to read aloud. When he opens the book, he notices it is the same one Amy had tested him with at the shelter, which brings back mixed feelings. Despite the betrayal from Amy, he wants to understand her perspective someday, realizing even at his age that people are far more complicated than any textbook. As he reads with elegance and confidence, the class is captivated, cheering him on with genuine admiration. Daphne is impressed as well, noting that few students can leave such an impact. By the end of the class, Rowan has new fans among his classmates, feeling like Tom Cruise, although one girl with short hair and green eyes catches his attention immediately. He recognizes her from a vision he once had. Sophie Poble introduces herself as the class president and student representative, shaking hands with Rowan while asking about his chosen electives. He says swordsmanship, and she notices his only weapon is a small dagger, suggesting he might be aiming to join the Union someday. Rowan clarifies that he simply wants to study everything, though he now wonders if swordsmanship is required for Union membership, which earns him a puzzled look from Sophie. Later, the students gather at the training grounds, where the instructor waits. Suddenly, everyone takes off running, demonstrating their mana-enhanced speed, which surprises Rowan at first, but excites him. Despite starting late, he quickly overtakes all the other students, moving faster than anyone expected and naturally taking the lead. Sophie, observing him, realizes his speed is far beyond ordinary, and Rowan joyfully challenges the class to try and catch him, laughing as they scramble to keep up. The day passes with a mix of excitement, learning, and a hint of friendly competition, leaving Rowan thrilled by the challenges and eager to explore everything the academy has to offer, already standing out as a prodigy among his peers. At the training grounds, the noisy excitement about the new student immediately catches the instructor's attention because the other students are loudly complaining and struggling to breathe after the race, while Rowan stands there looking perfectly relaxed, which honestly feels a little unfair to everyone else who just ran as if their lives depended on it. And the instructor watches him with growing curiosity, since he cannot believe such a small body moves that fast, so he decides this strange child deserves closer observation. The students eventually gather in a loose assembly while most of them are still bent over catching their breath. But Rowan happily looks around at his new classmates because he feels excited that so many people here can use mana just like him, while Sophie studies him carefully with narrow eyes, since, from her point of view, Rowan accelerates like a magical arrow and even laps the other runners, which is frankly rude behavior during a friendly race, and the fact that Rowan shows absolutely no exhaustion only makes the situation stranger. So when Rowan notices Sophie staring at him and casually asks if she enjoys the race, she almost jumps in surprise and silently wonders if he might secretly be some kind of demon who accidentally enrolled in school. After everyone finally recovers enough energy to stand without collapsing, the instructor introduces himself as Diego Sanchez, a respected master of swordsmanship who will teach them combat training, and Rowan immediately looks excited, while many other students look less enthusiastic because their legs are still protesting from the earlier sprint. But Diego begins the lesson by ordering everyone to pick up wooden practice swords, which produces a quiet wave of suffering across the class, since tired arms and swords are rarely a pleasant combination. Rowan, however, does not move right away, and Diego quickly notices the hesitation, so he tells him to grab a sword like everyone else. But Rowan approaches the weapon rack slowly, because the sight of a sword reminds him of Blake and the painful memories attached to it. Yet Diego reads the fear immediately and calmly explains that a sword is only a tool, since a weapon itself carries no good or evil intentions, and instead simply reveals the character of the person holding it, which means avoiding the tool will never solve the real problem. The explanation connects with Rowan instantly because he realizes that if Blake once used a staff instead of a sword, then he would probably be afraid of staffs instead, which would honestly be a very inconvenient fear for someone planning to live in a world full of pointy objects. So Rowan finally takes a wooden sword and accepts that even if he never becomes a swordmaster, running away from the weapon would accomplish nothing. Diego observes carefully and notices that Rowan holds the sword with surprising natural balance, which reveals talent, although he still seems unsure of his own willpower. So the instructor announces that the students will now duel in pairs where any method is acceptable as long as the goal is to defeat the opponent. And for the first match, Diego pairs Rowan with Sophie, which surprises both of them, while the other students confidently assume Sophie will win because her family is well known for producing skilled swordsmen. When the duel begins, Sophie takes a wide stance and studies Rowan carefully, while Rowan observes her technique with deep interest because this is the first time he sees real swordsmanship used in controlled practice rather than terrifying combat. And when Rowan adjusts his own stance, both Sophie and Diego freeze for a moment because he naturally forms a perfect neutral stance despite having no formal training, which is something most beginners struggle to achieve. Sophie refuses to lose because her family pride is involved, so she launches the first attack, but Rowan narrowly misses his counter and then quickly adjusts. While Sophie soon notices something strange, because every strike she prepares is avoided before it fully begins, which slowly forces her backward, as if Rowan somehow reads the future. And after several tense exchanges, she finally admits defeat, although she immediately asks for another match, and Rowan happily agrees since he clearly enjoys the challenge. The two continue sparring several more times until they each win 2 matches and lose 2, which turns the duel into a friendly rivalry, while the rest of the class feels relieved when they hear the next lesson will be about magic, since that means less running and fewer wooden swords flying toward their faces. But Rowan looks confused because he believes magic should be the most important subject for anyone hoping to join the union. His classmates stare at him with disbelief and explain that their magic teacher is so powerful that learning from him feels almost impossible. And when Rowan hears this description, his curiosity only grows because the teacher is Professor Arthur, the magic dean of the academy and a former Union commander, which basically means the class is about to learn magic from someone so advanced that most students spend more time being confused than actually understanding anything. Magic class begins, and the teacher is Professor Arthur, who in the past worked as a respected Union commander, and the moment Rowan senses the old man's mana, he feels impressed because the density is even stronger than the academy director's, which makes Rowan quietly wonder who the strongest person in the entire Union actually is. While Arthur hears about the strange new student and explains that his subject teaches the foundations of magic, even though most students complain that his lessons are painful for the brain and sometimes for the soul as well, yet Rowan openly says he wants to become a mage and join the Union, which immediately makes the professor pleased because enthusiasm for magic is rare among teenagers who usually prefer waving swords and pretending they are heroes. Arthur happily praises Rowan's spirit but also reminds him that choosing magic means stepping away from the easier path of swordsmanship, and Rowan finally understands why his classmates look at him like he just volunteered to carry 10 bags of books uphill. So the professor lets Sophie explain the situation, and she calmly describes that true mastery of magic demands an enormous amount of knowledge and discipline, which slowly crushes both body and mind, and even talented people require at least 10 years of study before anyone takes them seriously as real mages. While Arthur confirms that joining the Union as a mage after graduation is already difficult, and becoming an active member requires at least second-class magic, which makes Rowan disappointed for a moment before he casually decides that he will simply reach third-class magic before graduation, which sounds heroic in his head but makes the professor stare at him. Arthur then begins teaching properly and writes a complicated formula on the board, explaining that swordsmanship is the Union's main strength, while magic focuses on knowledge and control, and the strange equation represents the structure of a basic fire arrow spell, which already looks like a nightmare of symbols to the average student. Yet Rowan quietly remembers seeing a similar formula near the ritual pit earlier, while Arthur demonstrates the spell and forms a glowing arrow of fire that floats in the air. Although Rowan notices something odd because the arrow flickers slightly like it may collapse at any moment, and the professor calmly explains that magic formulas demand absolute precision, since even one small mistake can ruin an entire spell before adding a final correction, which suddenly stabilizes the arrow and makes it larger and far more powerful, leaving the students impressed while secretly grateful they only need to memorize the formula and not invent it. Arthur continues, explaining that mages must memorize many formulas and sometimes modify them, which requires patience, strong mana reserves, and a healthy mind, because changing a fire arrow into a fireball uses more mana and creates extra strain, while Sophie adds that many fighters prefer swords because channeling mana into a weapon is usually simpler and less exhausting, which basically means sword users swing metal while mages carry libraries inside their heads. And Rowan quickly understands the problem because a mage's ability is limited by the size of their mana pool, and unfortunately his own mana concentration is embarrassingly small, which means magic will not be easy for him, yet his curiosity refuses to slow down. Arthur then asks Rowan what is required to cast a spell, and Rowan answers that formulas are necessary, but remembering long equations during battle would be inconvenient, so mages develop magic circles that represent those formulas visually, and this realization helps Rowan understand that the strange tattoos he once saw on Lazarus's arm are actually magic circles engraved on the body for faster casting, which leads him to another idea that chanting must be the spoken version of a formula where mana flows through each word. And Arthur pauses in surprise because he reaches that conclusion far too quickly for someone who literally starts learning magic today. Yet he happily confirms the theory and demonstrates by casting a powerful fireball using only an incantation while explaining that tone, speed, and emotion influence the spell like a magical recitation, which fascinates Rowan more than anything he has studied before. The professor worries that all this complicated theory might scare the new student away, but Rowan instead looks even more interested, which convinces Arthur to begin teaching ancient magical languages, and every student receives a heavy book that immediately ruins their evening plans because homework now exists. While Sophie ends the class exhausted and already regrets taking so many courses this semester, whereas Rowan somehow fills his entire schedule with more classes like a curious machine that forgets humans require rest. Later, Sophie learns Rowan shares a dorm with Lucas, and after saying goodbye, she leaves while Rowan returns to the room and immediately studies the fire spell again because his weak mana forces him to search for creative solutions, and during this dangerous experiment, he accidentally succeeds in creating a functional new spell, which is an incredible achievement for a first-day mage, although the price is brutal because the strain completely drains his body and he collapses unconscious on the floor. So when Lucas finally enters the room, he finds Rowan lying there like someone whose brain literally exploded from studying too hard, which honestly is not far from the truth. Rowan slowly regains consciousness while hearing a familiar voice in his mind which belongs to Sienna, and the tone carries a quiet regret as if she and the other teachers now feel they push him too hard because they believe he is special and capable of handling more than a normal child should carry. And this strange dreamlike moment fades when Rowan finally opens his eyes and sees Lucas staring down at him with obvious relief because the poor roommate spends a good amount of time thinking Rowan might actually die from studying too aggressively, which would be a very embarrassing first week for both of them. Lucas immediately introduces himself and confirms that they share the same dorm room, while also admitting he feels extremely relieved to see Rowan alive and conscious again, since collapsing in the middle of the room is not a very comforting sight for a roommate who just arrives home hoping for a quiet evening. Rowan feels confused because he does not remember losing consciousness at all, and the entire moment after trying to cast the spell feels like a blank page. Yet Lucas explains that he becomes worried, not only because Rowan collapses, but also because Lucas actually receives instructions from his father to keep an eye on him. And the father in question happens to be Vice Captain Oscar, which suddenly makes the situation more interesting, while Lucas also hopes Rowan might say something nice about him if the topic ever reaches the vice captain, since apparently even the son of a powerful officer still wants a little positive reputation. Rowan quickly notices that Lucas appears older and taller than most students, which makes it easy to mistake him for an upperclassman. But the truth is, less impressive, because Lucas is actually 2 years older, simply because he fails the attendance requirement twice before, which basically makes him a veteran expert in the art of skipping school, while also being someone who clearly prefers swinging a sword over opening a textbook. Lucas looks around the messy room and guesses Rowan probably passes out while practicing magic, which is technically correct since Rowan tries to cast a fireball but remembers absolutely nothing afterward, while Lucas casually mentions he regrets. Rowan does not focus on swordsmanship because he clearly has talent, and Lucas himself trains heavily with the sword since he wants to follow the same path as his father. Rowan quietly studies Lucas and realizes something interesting because, even though Lucas spends less time studying, he possesses a surprisingly strong and dense mana signature, along with a solid physical build which shows how much effort invests in training, and this makes Rowan feel slightly discouraged, since his own progress still feels painfully slow. Rowan insists he should return to class despite the recent collapse, but Lucas somehow convinces him to skip for the day, because fresh air and food will probably help more than another lecture about ancient magical equations, and Rowan eventually agrees, realizing why Lucas failed the attendance rules twice since the man clearly treats school like an optional suggestion. The two wander around the city until Lucas drags Rowan to a place to eat and orders him to consume enough food to recover his energy. Yet, during the meal, Rowan senses a faint trace of mana nearby, which immediately grabs his attention, and curiosity wins again, so they walk toward a small magic shop where Rowan instantly notices that most objects inside carry faint magical energy, while Lucas unfortunately begins sneezing non-stop because the place contains enough dust to qualify as a historical monument. Rowan then remembers an important detail, which is the tragic fact that he has absolutely no money, but Lucas generously offers to pay for something since his father tells him to assist Rowan, and he jokingly asks Lucas to buy the entire store. Which becomes funny for exactly 3 seconds before Lucas reveals a tiny handful of coins that barely covers a single item. Rowan carefully searches for something affordable until he notices a strange stone egg carved with a complex magic circle, and the object emits a murky mana signature that immediately fascinates him, while the shop owner explains that it is called the Stone of Gydia, which most people treat as nothing more than a decorative object because no one manages to hatch whatever creature is sealed inside it. The shop owner admits the object might contain a mysterious creature trapped by the magic circle, but no one truly knows, and the seal appears extremely complicated, far beyond beginner-level spells. Yet Rowan becomes even more curious, while Lucas shrugs and says the egg looks more interesting than a boring book, and could probably serve as a weapon if thrown hard enough, which honestly feels like a very Lucas-style evaluation. Rowan finally decides to buy the mysterious egg, and the two leave the shop while evening slowly arrives, and Lucas suggests ending their rebellious day by visiting the most impressive structure in the Union, which leads them to the massive clock tower that serves as headquarters for both the governor and the commander. Rowan stands silently in front of the tower, feeling completely amazed, while Lucas explains that even captains ranked as low as 7th level are strong enough to defend an entire city alone, and above them stands the commander, whose power is said to be great enough to challenge an entire nation by himself, while the governor holds authority across the continent like a king. Looking up at the towering structure, Rowan quietly reflects on the enormous distance between himself and those legendary figures. Yet instead of feeling discouraged, he forms a strong ambition deep inside because one day he wants to stand among people of that level rather than simply staring at their tower from the ground. Soon his curiosity pushes him to ask Lucas about the strange red hands and symbols on the giant clock face because he wants to understand how the tower shows the date and time, and Lucas immediately scratches his head and squints at the tower while pretending to think very deeply. After struggling with the memory, Lucas finally remembers that the characters on the outer red ring represent the current year, and Rowan quickly notices that the symbols belong to an ancient language, while Lucas simply admits defeat and confesses he never learned how to read the tower properly, which is honestly impressive because the thing stands in the middle of the city like a giant homework assignment that he successfully ignores for years. Rowan studies the markings and slowly pieces the meaning together, and within moments, he reads the year as 262, which matches the current kingdom calendar, and after that, he examines the smaller dials and determines they represent the month and the day. So the tower is showing the date June 14th in the year 262, and the time is roughly 20 minutes past 7 in the evening, which Rowan understands almost instantly, while Lucas, who grew up here, still looks at the tower like it is a decorative rock. Yet Rowan's fascination with the tower is not just about curiosity because he remembers seeing the same structure before inside the terrifying vision shown to him by the strange tree, and in that vision the clock tower stands at the center of a destroyed union, surrounded by chaos, and if his memory is correct, the clock in that nightmare points to June 14th in the year 272, which is exactly 10 years into the future. After watching the tower for a while longer, the two roommates finally return to their dorm, and once Lucas confirms Rowan is no longer collapsing on the floor, he immediately grabs his wooden training sword and heads out again, because skipping lectures is apparently fine for him, but skipping physical training is a crime against his personal lifestyle, and he refuses to allow even a single lazy day to slow down his body. Rowan remains alone in the room, while his thoughts become heavier because the apocalyptic vision from the mysterious tree refuses to leave his mind, and he begins to suspect that it might not be a simple illusion, but possibly a glimpse of the future. And if that is true, then the destruction of the Union could actually happen unless something changes. To organize his thoughts, Rowan closes his eyes and enters his mind palace, where he begins examining every memory he has collected with his perfect recall, and he carefully rebuilds the image of the clock tower exactly as he saw it earlier, before moving deeper into the memories from the terrible vision. Piece by piece, he reconstructs the disaster scene while comparing it to the real buildings he knows in the present, and he slowly identifies details that connect the two timelines, including broken roofs, collapsed structures, and the body of a person crushed by falling debris, which confirms that the vision is not random chaos, but a very specific event. With hesitation, Rowan forces himself to revisit the most painful part of the memory, where lifeless bodies lie across the ground, and among them he recognizes older versions of the people he recently met, including Sophie, Lucas, and Sienna, which makes the scene far more disturbing because these are no longer strangers from a nightmare, but friends who might actually die. He then searches the memory for the image of his own future self, hoping to see what kind of rank he achieves by that time, and after digging through the fragments of the vision, he finally finds the moment where his future body appears, yet the viewing angle hides the badge on his chest, so Rowan uses his analytical mind to mentally rotate the memory and change the perspective. When he finally focuses on the chest where the rank badge should be, his blood runs cold because instead of a badge, he sees a massive wound torn through his body, revealing that his future self is already dying on the battlefield, which means the vision predicts not only the death of his friends, but also his own brutal end. Rowan quickly pulls his mind out of the memory and sits silently in the dark room, trying to calm his racing thoughts, while wondering if the tree sent the vision as a warning, since the fall of the Union would mean the collapse of the kingdom, and eventually the extinction of humanity itself. He remembers that the tree is created through black magic using human mana gathered from people trapped between life and death, and somewhere in the vision, he also sees a mysterious hooded figure who might be the key to understanding the entire disaster. Rowan does not fully trust the vision yet, but he decides that the safest path is to change the future before it arrives, and the easiest thing to change is himself, since the version of him in the vision clearly fails. He notices that his future self wears the black uniform of a Union member, so he wonders if avoiding that role might change history, or perhaps he could join the Management Bureau, which wears red uniforms, though another far more ambitious idea also appears in his mind, which is reaching the white suit of the commander before those 10 years pass. The next morning arrives, and both roommates prepare for classes after their rebellious day off, while Lucas casually reminds Rowan that Professor Daphne asked him to visit the faculty office before class, and Rowan wonders what kind of conversation waits for him behind that office door. Rowan walks straight to the faculty office, where Professor Daphne waits for him with the calm patience of someone who clearly spends half her life solving problems caused by ambitious students and mild academic disasters, and she immediately asks about his condition after the dramatic collapse from the previous day. Rowan learns that Daphne already records the whole incident as medical leave, so he will not get punished for missing class, which honestly saves him from the very impressive achievement of failing attendance on his second day, and she gently explains that she worries he overloads himself by enrolling in too many elective courses, and suggests that he consider removing a few classes before his brain tries another emergency shutdown. But Rowan politely refuses because he insists on attending every lesson and even admits he feels excited about the classes he has not experienced yet. Daphne still feels partly responsible for the collapse, but Rowan assures her the situation will not happen again and thanks her sincerely before leaving the office and heading toward his first lecture while quietly practicing mana cultivation as naturally as breathing, since the training now happens automatically in the background of his mind. More importantly, Rowan now carries a new purpose because he believes the best way to change the terrible future he sees is to grow stronger together with his friends rather than alone, and when he enters the classroom, all of his classmates immediately turn to look at him with varying levels of concern because everyone hears about the dramatic fainting incident, which apparently becomes the Academy's entertainment of the day. Rowan appreciates their concern and asks the class for their attention because he wants to request a favor from everyone. He explains that he hopes everyone will try studying both magic and swordsmanship together because he believes the two paths should support each other rather than stay separate, and he admits he worries that the request might sound unreasonable. Yet the female students are already convinced by his sincere charm, while the male students hesitate because adding extra lessons means more work and fewer excuses to relax. Instead of arguing, Rowan decides to demonstrate his idea and asks Lucas, of all people, to try attending a magic lecture for one day, which is slightly ironic since Lucas normally avoids studying with professional dedication, yet Rowan's determination eventually convinces the class, and when Professor Arthur enters the lecture hall, he finds every seat filled, which almost looks like a miracle. Arthur quickly hears that Rowan encourages everyone to attend, and the sight of a full lecture hall fills the old professor with energy, while Rowan calmly explains that he simply wants to show his classmates that magic is not something distant or impossible. Curious about his progress, Arthur allows Rowan to step onto the teaching platform, and Lucas, sitting beside Sophie in the audience, quietly wonders if he should feel proud or terrified that his roommate walks onto a professor's stage like it belongs to him. Outside the lecture hall, an unusual group gathers because Director Lazarus arrives to observe the academy, and Professor Daphne suspects Rowan is one reason for the visit, while Sienna also appears on her day off after receiving instructions from Vice Captain Oscar, and even Diego Sanchez abandons the sword training field to see why his most promising freshman swordsman attends a magic lecture, while the principal joins the group as well, turning the hallway into a meeting of extremely important people, pretending not to spy on a first-year class. Daphne reminds them to remain quiet before opening the door, and the moment it moves, a wave of heat greets them because a crimson fireball burns in the center of the classroom, while Rowan stands beneath it, looking delighted rather than terrified, which is usually not the expression people wear when holding a floating explosion above their head. Professor Arthur already raises a magical barrier to protect the students, while Rowan maintains a perfectly stable fireball, which immediately shocks everyone because such a spell sits far beyond the normal first-year curriculum, and even the simpler fire arrow usually takes talented students 5 years to master. The principal watches the spell and notices the energy looks incredibly pure, almost like sacred magic, while Diego Sanchez recognizes the abnormal density even though he focuses on swords, and Director Lazarus quietly realizes that the flame behaves too steadily to be an ordinary fireball, which suggests Rowan creates a modified spell entirely. Sienna, who once trained Rowan, remembers his unusual sensitivity to mana and cannot understand how a boy raised in a miserable shelter now controls magic with such beauty and precision, yet her admiration quickly turns into concern when she remembers that Rowan collapsed just yesterday, and she warns the others that the demonstration might be pushing him too far again, which means someone may need to stop the enthusiastic young mage before his body decides to protest a second time. The adults watching from the doorway hesitate to interrupt because the floating fireball in the classroom is honestly too impressive to ruin, and Rowan stands calmly at the center of it while feeding a steady flow of mana into the flame, using his own method, which focuses more on stability than raw size, since an uncontrolled burst of mana could easily turn the spell unstable, but Rowan manages the flow with careful precision like someone balancing water in a cup while walking. Instead of worrying about the danger, Rowan becomes fascinated by the protective barrier that Professor Arthur casts around the students, because the structure of the spell reminds him of the endless dark pit he once saw during the ritual, which makes his thoughts wander toward the dangerous idea of what might happen if the fireball collides with the barrier, though he wisely keeps that curiosity inside his head and simply praises Arthur before asking for the name of the defensive spell. Arthur is so stunned that he forgets to answer for a moment, because maintaining such a strong spell usually demands complete focus, yet Rowan casually holds a conversation while controlling the fire perfectly, which honestly breaks several unwritten rules of magic at the same time. So before the situation becomes even more ridiculous, the professor quickly expands his barrier and closes it around the fireball until the flames vanish completely. The room releases a collective breath because many students apparently forget how lungs work during magical demonstrations, and Arthur looks at Rowan while debating whether to praise him for talent or scold him. At that moment, Director Lazarus calmly walks onto the stage while clapping and answers Rowan's earlier question by explaining that the defensive spell is called the Arthur Flame Barrier, which happens to be Arthur's signature technique, and Rowan immediately compliments the impressive name, while Arthur awkwardly explains that someone else actually named it for him. Since the topic of names appears, Rowan is asked what he calls his own spell, and he awkwardly claims it is just a normal fireball, which convinces absolutely no one in the room, because anyone with basic magical knowledge can see that the spell behaves very differently, and Rowan eventually admits he pretends not to notice since he has not chosen a proper name yet. Director Lazarus then asks why Rowan risks such a dangerous demonstration, and Rowan answers honestly that he trusts his own control, and also trusts Professor Arthur to protect everyone if something goes wrong, while his real goal is simply to encourage his classmates because many of them might want to try magic but feel too intimidated to begin. Arthur listens quietly and realizes that Rowan might have a point, because if a freshman can casually cast a fireball, then perhaps the limits teachers repeat for years are not as absolute as they believe, which leaves the old professor slightly embarrassed about how often he warns students to wait for later. Rowan then asks for a little more time on the stage and calls Lucas to join him, which surprises Lucas greatly since he expects to spend the class sitting quietly rather than becoming the main demonstration prop in front of the entire room. Rowan explains that magic and swordsmanship both revolve around controlling mana in different ways, so Lucas, who trains his body and mana every day, should theoretically be capable of crossing into magic as well, though the problem appears immediately because Lucas has never studied even a tiny piece of magical theory. Rowan tries teaching him through a simple incantation spoken in the ancient language, but Lucas struggles with the pronunciation, and the lesson slows to a painful crawl because repeating the first year several times does not magically grant linguistic skills, which becomes painfully obvious while Rowan patiently tries again and again. Eventually, Rowan translates the incantation into a poetic explanation of the spell, yet the class looks increasingly confused, and even Sophie appears completely lost, as if Rowan suddenly switches to speaking an alien dialect. For the first time, Rowan feels helpless because he believes sharing knowledge should help everyone grow stronger, yet none of them understand the simplest step, and the thought of the terrible future he sees begins creeping back into his mind. Before his frustration deepens, Professor Arthur steps in smoothly and praises Rowan's enthusiasm before asking if he can show the spell formula instead, which immediately pulls Rowan out of his gloomy thoughts. Rowan lifts a piece of chalk with telekinesis and begins writing the complete formula on the board, while the students stare with equal parts amazement and amusement because casually moving chalk through the air is apparently just another normal talent for him. When the formula is finished, Arthur raises the barrier again to protect the stage, while he and Director Lazarus carefully examine the writing, and Rowan explains that he does not copy the formula from anywhere, but simply modifies the one Arthur wrote earlier. The two experienced mages exchange a silent glance, because Rowan is essentially claiming he invented a new spell formula, which is not something first-year students normally do between breakfast and lunch. Realizing the importance of the situation, Lazarus and Arthur quietly decide they need a private discussion and begin leaving the room while thanking Rowan for the demonstration and unfortunately dumping the remaining lecture hours onto Sienna, who only arrives to observe and suddenly becomes the emergency substitute teacher. She clearly feels like someone who accidentally signs up to pilot a ship without reading the manual. Soon after the dramatic classroom demonstration, the Academy faculty gathers for an emergency meeting. Director Lazarus begins the discussion by presenting the central issue, which is the unusual case of Rowan and the strange fireball spell that sparks the entire gathering. Professor Arthur takes the floor and carefully explains everything he witnesses during the demonstration, while emphasizing that Rowan does not simply cast a strong spell, but actually modifies the structure of a complex formula, which results in a completely new variation. And although the power of the spell itself remains moderate, the conceptual change behind it is extraordinary, because no freshman should be able to reconstruct and adjust magical formulas with such freedom, which leaves several professors quietly skeptical until Arthur reminds them that he personally verifies every detail. Director Lazarus adds that the Bureau will conduct further analysis, but for now the Academy must accept the possibility that Rowan discovers a new approach to magic. And while that makes him sound like an unbelievable prodigy, the real problem is how the school should educate someone whose abilities clearly sit far beyond the normal first-year curriculum. Some professors suggest following traditional teaching methods, while others argue that a genius like Rowan requires a special program designed for advanced students. Yet this idea conflicts with the Academy's principle of equal education for all, which leads to a heated debate because nobody wants the Academy to lose such talent through poor guidance, while one bold professor even suggests allowing Rowan to join the Union early, though the proposal receives immediate resistance since sending a child into real field operations would be reckless. As the discussion continues, Professor Arthur raises another concern, which is Rowan's personality, because although he is polite and kind, his overwhelming talent might unintentionally isolate him from others, and the Union values teamwork and character as much as ability, so a student who stands out too much might struggle during the final admission interview, which is judged by someone who prioritizes personality above power. Several teachers quickly defend Rowan and explain that his actions come from good intentions rather than arrogance, because he simply tries to help his classmates improve, but the enormous gap between him and the other freshmen makes those efforts awkward since teaching magic to beginners, while casually inventing new spells, is basically the academic equivalent of asking toddlers to jog alongside a racing horse. Since the professors cannot settle the issue alone, Director Lazarus suggests inviting Rowan himself for a conversation, and everyone agrees this is the most reasonable approach. So, a few minutes later, the young prodigy is escorted into the faculty room where he sits at the large table, while Professor Daphne gently asks how he feels after the events of the class. Rowan honestly admits he feels frustrated about what happened earlier with Lucas, because he realizes he expects his friend to learn magic far too quickly, and after thinking about it, he forms several theories, including the possibility that Lucas simply prefers swordsmanship, or that starting sword training at a young age shapes his thinking in that direction, while Rowan worries that he pressures his friend without considering these factors. He even wonders if his classmates might somehow be unwell, because their abilities differ from his own, which accidentally turns normal talent into a medical condition inside his overactive imagination until Professor Arthur reassures him that everyone is perfectly healthy and simply learning at a different pace, which finally eases Rowan's concerns. Director Lazarus then asks the main question, which is why Rowan feels such urgency to teach everyone magic. And Rowan answers with simple sincerity that magic itself is not the important part because he only wants his friends to grow stronger together so that one day they can all become union members side by side. Hearing this innocent explanation removes most of the faculty's worries about his character, and Professor Daphne even shows a small expression of pride before Rowan is dismissed from the meeting. Afterward, the professors work through the night, drafting a new education policy that adjusts the academy curriculum so that academic training matches the level of top students, while social development still progresses with the average group. And the entire system is quietly reshaped because of one overly curious freshman who accidentally redesigns the school simply by existing. The next morning, Professor Diego announces on the training field that both swordsmanship and magic will now become mandatory subjects for all students, which surprises many people, including Rowan, while Lucas nearly misses the announcement entirely because he is busy yawning loud enough to rival a sleepy dragon. Another change brings active union members into classes as assistant instructors, so students can learn from real field experience, while Rowan, Sophie, and Lucas are assigned to train mainly against each other through rotating sparring matches, which immediately excites Lucas, who has been waiting for the chance to test Rowan properly. Lucas challenges Rowan first, and the match begins while Sophie watches closely before taking her own turn, and although she hopes to perform well, her wooden sword is knocked from her hands surprisingly quickly because Rowan reads her movements with frightening precision, like someone studying an open book. Rather than feeling discouraged, Sophie shakes his hand and asks for advice, and Rowan calmly explains that her mana flow is slightly misaligned, while Lucas bluntly simplifies the explanation by saying she swings wildly and needs better control along with stronger legs, which sounds rude but is not entirely wrong. Rowan refines the explanation further by suggesting she shift more mana toward her lower body to stabilize her stance. And while Rowan provides thoughtful analysis, Lucas adds playful teasing, which somehow creates a strange but effective teaching partnership that makes Professor Diego smile quietly. A few days later, Professor Daphne calls Rowan to the faculty office again, and this time the meeting feels far more relaxed because Rowan has already settled into academy life and no longer carries the heavy worry he once had about his friends, since he now understands them much better, and even learns their strengths, weaknesses, habits, and strange personalities, which honestly makes his daily life far more interesting than his textbooks ever expected. Daphne is pleased to see this change and notes that Rowan finally learns how to empathize with people his own age, which is a big step for someone whose brain usually runs 10 steps ahead of everyone else, and Rowan admits that school life has become surprisingly enjoyable because his classmates cheer him on and occasionally reward him with snacks, though the situation becomes confusing whenever some of the girls invite him to go shopping or admire flowers after class, which seems completely unrelated to studying and therefore completely suspicious to his academic instincts. Daphne cannot help laughing at the situation and gently explains that teenagers often develop romantic interests at this age, which is a concept Rowan processes with the same expression someone might have when discovering a strange, new species of insect. And his usual answer to every invitation is simply suggesting they study together, which is probably the least romantic sentence ever invented. When Daphne asks if there is any girl, he feels particularly close to Rowan, immediately thinks of Sophie because she stands apart from the others as a talented swordswoman who can also produce flames, and over time, he learns about her difficult background as the illegitimate daughter of a noble family, which places constant pressure on her life. And this knowledge makes Rowan feel a strong sense of friendship and respect toward her, while Lucas naturally completes their trio since the three of them spend most of their time together. Rowan deeply admires Lucas for his physical strength, although he also develops a private theory that his roommate trains so much that his brain slowly transforms into muscle, which might explain why studying makes Lucas look as if someone asked him to wrestle a dictionary, and while this theory would probably horrify a normal person, Daphne has already accepted that geniuses often think in very strange ways. After leaving her office, Rowan visits Professor Arthur to discuss the weakness of his constitution, since his naturally low mana capacity continues to limit his magic despite his overwhelming talent, and the professor explains several possible methods such as magical tools or rare elixirs, but most of these solutions are difficult to obtain or unreliable, which means improving his body will not be easy. Then Arthur quietly removes a necklace from his neck and reveals a rare elixir inside the locket, which he once receives from the governor as a reward, and he decides to give it to Rowan, believing the boy might benefit from it more than anyone else. And although Rowan hesitates, he eventually swallows the small white pill and briefly feels as if he floats inside a vast ocean of mana before the sensation fades completely, leaving him sitting in the same chair with absolutely nothing changed. The professor assumes the elixir fails, and Rowan calmly confirms that it produces no effect at all, which is disappointing, yet not entirely surprising. And rather than wasting energy complaining, he decides the better solution is to reshape magic itself so that it works for him, instead of trying to change his own body. 6 months pass, and the final exam for first-year magic arrives, where Rowan calmly stands before Professor Arthur and Director Lazarus, then forms 2 small fireballs in his hands, and slowly increases their size while maintaining perfect control, which once again impresses the 2 senior mages who watch the display with quiet admiration. Rowan worries that such spells remain weak compared to the destructive power expected from Union members, but Arthur assures him that casting magic without incantations already places him at the level of a 4th-class mage, which officially qualifies him as a high-level mage, despite his low mana pool, and the professor advises him to continue developing his own unique style while studying ancient texts to recreate stronger spells through analysis. To protect Rowan's secret weakness, Arthur and Lazarus also form a formal mage pact, promising to keep his constitutional limits confidential. And while the 2 experienced mages perform an ancient chant, Rowan simply watches the ritual with mild curiosity, because from his perspective, it mostly looks like 2 elderly scholars conducting a very dramatic handshake. Another year passes, and Rowan, together with Sophie and Lucas, enters their 3rd year at the academy, while his reputation continues to grow. And one day, Professor Diego calls a faculty meeting to announce an unusual decision that Rowan will no longer receive advanced combat training involving mana, since pushing him toward dangerous battlefield techniques may be unnecessary. Diego explains that Rowan already possesses enough sword skill to pass the Union entrance test simply by drawing his blade, yet his true future clearly lies in magic, and focusing entirely on that path will be safer and more beneficial for the Union itself. When Daphne later asks Professor Arthur how powerful Rowan becomes as a mage, the old professor remains silent for a moment before calmly admitting something that surprises everyone in the room, which is that he has already reached the point where there is nothing left for the professor to teach him because the student has grown beyond the limits of his own master. At this stage of his education, Rowan can freely apply both 1st and 2nd-class magic with effortless precision while also steadily recreating the formulas required for 3rd-class spells, and because his mind processes magical structures with unnatural speed, he often treats even the most complicated spell equations as if they were simple toys that can be taken apart, examined, and rebuilt, which makes many professors quietly realize that the boy has already become a monster of magical understanding despite being only a 3rd-year student whose age should normally limit such achievements. As Rowan begins entering his growth spurt, his appearance matures as well, and the female students of the academy become increasingly fascinated by the academy's golden boy, whose intelligence, calm personality, and striking looks make him dangerously charming. Although Rowan himself remains blissfully unaware of most of this attention because his entire life has been written around studying magic rather than romance, which means he unintentionally ignores the admiration surrounding him. The first Magic Studies lecture of the new academic year ends without any trouble, and after reminding the class about their assignments, Professor Arthur asks Rowan to remain behind for a private conversation where he introduces a very unusual opportunity that will soon take place at the academy known as the Magic Scholarship Exchange Tournament. Rowan is surprised because despite spending 3 years at the academy, he has never heard of such an event before. And Arthur explains that it used to be an occasional gathering where scholars exchanged theories and debated magical formulas. However, the tradition slowly disappeared as the age of magic declined over time, yet now the event is being revived for a very unexpected reason, which is Rowan himself. Hearing this explanation leaves Rowan stunned, because the idea that a large academic event could exist simply because of him sounds completely absurd. Yet Arthur calmly reveals that Rowan's growing reputation has spread far beyond the Union Academy and has even reached the distant autonomous kingdom of Schwerin, which is famous throughout the magical world as the home of the legendary Magic Tower, where powerful mages dedicate their lives to studying the arcane arts. Schwerin stands apart from the other kingdoms because its rulers are also scholars, and the Tower Master holds the rank of Duke, while the entire region functions almost like a giant research institution devoted to magical knowledge. And Arthur himself once trained there in his youth, before leaving to join the Union after reaching the level of a 3rd-class high-level mage. Because the scholars of Schwerin are driven by endless curiosity, they become extremely interested after hearing rumors about a mysterious young mage at the Union Academy who is supposedly capable of casting 4th-class magic without incantations, which naturally leads them to organize this exchange so they can verify the rumors with their own eyes and challenge the Academy's famous Prodigy in an academic debate. Arthur admits that Rowan could technically refuse the invitation, since facing experienced mages from the Magic Tower may be quite difficult. However, the Union has prepared a reward that would be extremely hard for Rowan to ignore because the winner of the scholarly exchange will receive a rare magical elixir as the grand prize. Even though Rowan once consumed an elixir that failed to improve his constitution, the possibility of obtaining another one still sparks hope inside him. And since the competition will be decided through magical theory debates rather than combat, it means he might obtain the rare item simply by demonstrating superior understanding of magic. With such an opportunity standing before him, Rowan ultimately accepts the challenge, and a few days later, the long-awaited exchange finally begins when a group of cloaked mages from Schwerin arrives at the Union Academy, forming an impressive lineup of scholars whose dense mana immediately reveals their powerful training. Dean Arthur politely welcomes the visiting delegation, and one of the Schwerin mages lowers his hood, revealing himself as Bert, who respectfully greets Arthur as his senior since both of them once studied within the Magic Tower. While Rowan quietly observes the visiting students and notices that Schwerin has sent 3 competitors who are noticeably older than him and possess considerable magical presence. Despite the fact that the Union has only one representative, the visiting scholars still act confident, although Rowan remains perfectly calm, and when one of the Schwerin students stares at him intensely, Rowan simply responds with a friendly smile, which unexpectedly flusters the rival student and causes him to quickly look away. Later that afternoon, the competition hall fills with spectators, including many younger students who nervously wonder whether their senior, Rowan, can really face 3 opponents alone. While the enthusiastic girls cheer loudly enough to nearly damage Lucas's hearing as he reminds them that this is only a magical debate rather than a life-threatening duel. Sitting beside him, Sophie watches the stage calmly because she fully believes Rowan will overwhelm the competition using nothing but his mind. And finally, Professor Daphne steps onto the podium, announcing the official beginning of the scholarly exchange between the Union Academy and the Kingdom of Schwerin. Soon the competitors enter the hall, and after the rules are explained, the first challenger steps forward, introducing himself as Yuli Marco from Schwerin, who will face Rowan in the opening round, while Rowan calmly selects the very first topic for the debate, choosing a subject that has fascinated him for a long time, which is the study of telekinesis and the manipulation of objects through pure magical force. The representatives from Schwerin are completely stunned the moment Rowan calmly announces the subject of the first debate, because in scholarly exchanges, the opening topic is usually chosen to display the most advanced magical achievements of a faction. And yet the Union Academy's sole representative confidently selects a simple first-class spell, like telekinesis, which many of the visiting mages immediately consider either a childish joke or proof that the rumors surrounding Rowan have been exaggerated, since they certainly do not travel all this way just to witness a discussion about a beginner-level spell. While the Schwerin delegation murmurs with quiet disappointment, Dean Arthur and Director Lazarus remain silent because they already understand Rowan's unusual habit of beginning with the simplest concepts before tearing them apart and rebuilding them into something far more complex. Yuli Marco openly dismisses Rowan's proposal and declares that discussing telekinesis is beneath the dignity of such a prestigious magical forum. Yet Rowan calmly asks whether Yuli is mocking Schwerin itself, because even the most basic spells contain deep complexities that deserve serious exploration if a mage truly wishes to pursue magical truth. Yuli insists that wasting time analyzing such a trivial spell serves no purpose, but Rowan quietly replies that a mage's duty is to investigate truth, regardless of how small or ordinary the subject may appear, which leaves Yuli with little room to continue arguing. Eventually, running out of patience, Yuli reluctantly agrees to debate telekinesis, although Rowan politely asks what topic Yuli originally prepared, and the Schwerin student arrogantly proposes analyzing the complex structure of the fireball spell, while condescendingly suggesting that such a topic may be difficult for someone of Rowan's age, though he is willing to allow an easier opponent on this rare occasion. Professor Arthur quickly realizes that Schwerin must have heard rumors about Rowan's fireball abilities and is attempting to trap him with a subject they believe they understand far better than a young student. However, Rowan calmly surprises everyone by suggesting that instead of debating the spells separately, they should examine telekinesis and fireball together as a single subject, since combining familiar spells could reveal far more meaningful insights than analyzing them individually. Without hesitation, Rowan lifts a piece of chalk using telekinesis and begins writing formulas across the board without chanting a single word, which immediately unsettles the Schwerin mages because silent casting is extremely rare, even among experienced scholars. Determined not to appear inferior, Yuli Marco also lifts chalk with telekinesis, yet he must continuously chant to maintain the spell while the audience quietly watches the two magical formulas slowly fill the board. When the writing finishes, Yuli explains his argument. First presenting the traditional formulas for telekinesis and fireball as separate spells created by ancient archmages whose structures are considered fixed and therefore unsuitable for recombination. Then Rowan steps forward and calmly explains that telekinesis is usually treated as a simple spell, but in reality it is often misused because most mages rely heavily on raw magical power rather than understanding the deeper mechanics hidden within the formula. Inspired by Ali's earlier suggestion, Rowan decides to explore a more interesting concept, which involves merging the logic of both spells into a single theoretical structure. On the board, Rowan displays his rewritten formulas, where the first section demonstrates how telekinesis can control an already existing fireball, while the second concept requires a short demonstration. The chalk floating before him suddenly spins rapidly under Rowan's mental control until friction generates a spark, which quickly grows into a tiny flame, and within seconds, the spinning chalk transforms into a blazing miniature fireball created through the direct manipulation of telekinetic force. The Schwerin mages stare in disbelief, because Rowan essentially reconstructs the foundations of two established spells within minutes and produces an entirely new magical phenomenon directly before their eyes. While maintaining the spinning flame, Rowan continues explaining advanced principles related to energy conversion, mana efficiency, and structural spell integration, delivering what feels less like a debate and more like a master lecture that shatters many assumptions the visiting scholars once considered absolute truths. None of the Schwerin students can keep up with Rowan's explanation, and even the experienced senior mages struggle to follow the logic of the young prodigy, whose understanding of magic appears to exist on an entirely different level. After finishing his calm and precise explanation, Rowan politely asks Yuli Marco if he has any corrections or additional insights, because Rowan genuinely wishes to learn more if he has overlooked something important. Unfortunately, Yuli can neither replicate the demonstration nor fully understand the complex theory being discussed, and the crushing pressure of realizing he has challenged someone who seems like magic itself, disguised as a student, quickly overwhelms him. His breathing becomes unstable, and moments later he suddenly coughs before blood trickles from his nose, forcing the attendants to rush him to the infirmary after being quite literally defeated by words alone. With that dramatic conclusion, Rowan continues dominating the remaining debates through pure logic and unmatched understanding, eventually securing victory for the Union Academy and earning the coveted Elixir Prize, which the visiting mage Bert respectfully presents to him while thanking Rowan for the extraordinary intellectual spectacle despite Schwerin's defeat. Bert also advises Rowan not to consume the elixir immediately because powerful elixirs can produce dangerous side effects if taken too young, suggesting that Rowan wait until graduation, which still lies 2 years in the future. Meanwhile, among the many students watching Rowan from afar stands a third-year girl named Rita, who has secretly loved him for the entire 3 years they have studied together, and although she knows Rowan is admired by nearly every student in the academy, she finally gathers the courage to confess her feelings on the last day of their 3rd year. Her sincere confession receives a gentle yet firm rejection because Rowan explains that for him, love means treasuring the memory of someone who has already left this world and nothing more, while also asking Rita to carefully examine her own feelings because admiration, excitement, or nervousness can easily be mistaken for true love. His calm reasoning strikes Rita harder than anger ever could, yet strangely it also clears her thoughts, and although the rejection hurts, she realizes that confessing her feelings is a brave and meaningful step that allows her one-sided love for Rowan to finally end without regret on the final day of her 3rd year. Professor Daphne begins the lecture by calmly informing the class that Director Lazaros from the Academy Administration has come to visit and will share some important information about the future of the Union, which immediately excites the students because whenever high-ranking officials appear, it usually means something serious is about to be discussed, and the class politely applauds while Lazaros stands at the front looking like a dignified moon-faced noble who clearly enjoys the dramatic entrance. He begins explaining the reality of joining the Union and quickly ruins several students' heroic fantasies by saying that although thousands of candidates take the entrance exam every year, only a small number actually pass because the Union does not accept ordinary people and treats membership like a royal privilege rather than a simple job, which makes the students sit up straighter since they suddenly realize they are aiming for something far more elite than they imagined. One student nervously asks why the Union is always short on members if so many people apply. and Lazaros patiently explains that talent decides everything because the Union only recruits individuals capable of protecting the kingdom while also handling magical crises, which means most applicants fail before they even understand the difficulty of the work. Another student immediately asks about the salary and benefits, which causes several classmates to lean forward with suspicious interest, since noble ideals are nice, but food still costs money, and Lazaros calmly answers that the salary is generous enough for members to dedicate their lives entirely to missions, while also reminding them that Union agents serve directly under the king, which technically makes them some of the most privileged officials in the kingdom, and the room fills with impressed whispers as everyone imagines themselves wearing fancy cloaks while receiving royal paychecks. Then Rowan asks whether joining the Union will actually make someone stronger because he followed his teacher's advice and devoted himself to magic yet still feels weak, which surprisingly pleases Lazaros, since it proves the boy is actually thinking about the future rather than daydreaming about titles, and he explains that real strength develops through experience and responsibility, which means anyone who survives life in the Union will naturally become stronger whether they like it or not. After that, Rowan quietly returns to his usual routine of studying ancient magic and once again dives deep into historical records, where he recalls Senior Sienna once mentioning that his ability resembles the powers of the ancient elves, which sounds impressive until Rowan discovers that elves mainly rely on communicating with elemental spirits rather than controlling mana directly, which means their magic works completely differently from his own abilities. He continues reading and learns that during the era of the World Tree, elves and dark elves once possessed tremendous power, but when the tree vanished, their abilities collapsed, and human civilization gradually took over, while elves slowly faded into rarity, which disappoints Rowan because none of this information explains the strange mana perception he possesses. Later, Rowan visits Professor Arthur in the library to ask about dark magic, and the old professor explains that information is scarce because groups using dark magic eventually became enemies of the Union, although he does reveal that dark mana behaves differently from ordinary mana and is often tied to destructive emotions and demonic energy, which makes Rowan quietly remember moments when he noticed strange, cloudy mana around certain people. Months pass, and Rowan continues training AMD one day. He looks at the elixir he once won, and although he was advised to drink it years later, curiosity wins, because Rowan has never been famous for patience, and he swallows the potion while hoping his teachers never discover this brilliant example of academic responsibility. The potion sharpens his perception, and suddenly the flow of mana around him becomes clearer than ever, which allows him to examine the mysterious stone he has kept for years, and when he channels mana into it, the object finally reacts, forming a glowing magic circle that cracks open like an egg. Rowan stares in stunned silence as the shell floats in the air and releases a surge of ancient magic, revealing that something extraordinary has been hidden inside the stone all along. And for once, even the Academy's golden genius looks genuinely shocked. When the strange stone finally cracks open, Rowan expects something mysterious or ancient to appear. Yet what comes out is a small black bird with bright yellow feathers on its head, which immediately makes him stare in confusion because after years of magical buildup, the grand secret inside the stone turns out to be what looks suspiciously like an owl. And when Rowan casually calls it an owl, the little creature becomes strangely offended before immediately cuddling against him as if it decides he belongs to it now, which Rowan accepts with calm resignation because after all this buildup, he might as well keep the bird and simply names it Owl, while noticing that the strange mana that once surrounded the stone completely disappears after the creature hatches. Several years pass, and the story moves to the front gate of the Union Academy, where Oscar arrives after 5 long years, carrying a gift for his son, while quietly reflecting on how he never truly believed he would reach graduation safely. And while waiting near the ceremony grounds, he notices something rather ridiculous unfolding as Professor Arthur, Professor Daphne, and Sienna are practically arguing like stubborn relatives over who should officially become Rowan's guardian, which leaves Oscar standing nearby wondering how Rowan somehow collected so many overprotective adults in such a short time. Soon, Rowan is called to the stage for the graduation ceremony, and the crowd immediately begins whispering because many younger students only know him by reputation, while others quietly assume he must belong to some powerful, noble family, judging by his calm confidence and impressive achievements, although the truth is far less glamorous. Standing at the podium, Rowan calmly introduces as a beggar from an orphanage and explains that when he was only 3 years old, he was nearly sacrificed by a dark organization before the Union rescued him and brought him to the academy, where teachers and classmates helped shape his life and give him a purpose, which is why he now wishes to dedicate his abilities to protecting people instead of chasing power for its own sake. His speech is simple yet sincere, and the audience becomes quiet as he thanks the academy teachers and his friends for guiding him through the years, while the professors watching nearby feel relieved because despite Rowan's overwhelming intelligence, he remains a kind young man who still remembers the people who helped him grow. After the ceremony, Rowan walks through town with Lucas and Sophie, while Lucas immediately asks whether Rowan plans to take the union entrance exam right away, which Rowan confirms with a calm smile, because joining the union has always been his goal from the beginning. Rowan notices Sophie walking quietly beside them, looking slightly discouraged after rushing through her speech during the ceremony due to nervousness, which makes Rowan gently reassure her that once they enter the union and rise even higher, everyone will eventually recognize her real talent. Sophie becomes visibly flattered by his encouragement, while Rowan remains completely unaware that his words have the emotional effect of a heroic speech delivered directly into someone's heart, which is honestly impressive considering he probably thinks he is simply stating basic facts. The trio eventually reaches the union headquarters, where the entrance exam registration is taking place, and the area is crowded with candidates hoping to join the organization, while Rowan calmly introduces himself as a graduate from the Union Academy, which instantly attracts attention because the academy rarely produces students young enough to attempt the exam immediately. Officials quickly confirm that Rowan is indeed the academy's top graduate and hand him his testing ticket, which causes nearby applicants to whisper about the famous Prodigy, who can apparently cast magic without incantations, while Rowan simply walks toward the testing area with the relaxed attitude of someone heading to a casual afternoon class. Before entering the exam hall, Rowan tells Lucas and Sophie to simply perform the same way they always do and meet afterward, which surprisingly works as motivational advice, because when Rowan says something confidently, people tend to believe success is inevitable. Moments later, Rowan is called forward as the next candidate, and when he enters the testing arena, a large combat golem appears before him as the first trial designed to measure a candidate's magical ability. Rowan calmly raises his hand, and blue mana begins gathering around his palm, which immediately shocks the observers watching from the sidelines because the density and control of the energy is far beyond what they expect from someone his age. The golem begins moving forward, but before it can even react, Rowan releases his magic, and the construct suddenly starts melting like a chocolate sculpture left under the summer sun until its entire body collapses, leaving only the glowing core floating briefly in the air before it drops to the floor with a dull sound. Rowan stands quietly in the testing arena after defeating the golem, and the examiner looks completely stunned because the usual expectation for this test is that candidates will struggle with simple spells like fireballs, ice arrows, or other basic attacks, yet Rowan casually melts the entire construct as if he is cleaning dust from a table, which leaves the officials silently wondering whether the exam accidentally invited a monster instead of a student. As Rowan walks out of the arena, the crowd begins whispering excitedly because none of them have ever seen magic used in that way before, and the rumors about the academy's top graduate suddenly feel very real, which makes several candidates nervously rethink their life decisions. While everyone celebrates, Rowan notices Sophie standing quietly nearby, looking a little uneasy, so he gently tells her that he is looking forward to seeing her performance and reminds her that they should all enter the union together, which finally makes Sophie smile with renewed confidence. Soon, the examiner calls her name, and Sophie steps forward toward the arena, clearly nervous but determined, while Lucas encourages her to stay calm and simply do her best, which is surprisingly reasonable advice coming from someone who normally behaves like a walking celebration. When Sophie enters the arena, a large golem appears just like before, and the spectators begin analyzing her stance, like self-appointed martial arts experts, while one man confidently claims that she is preparing to use the famous sword technique of the Pobble family, though he also complains that her posture does not look perfect, which proves that even in magical exams there is always someone eager to judge from the sidelines. Before the commentary becomes more annoying, Sophie suddenly moves forward with incredible speed, as yellow flames burst around her blade, and in a series of lightning-fast strikes, she cuts through the golem so quickly that the construct barely has time to react before its body collapses into pieces. The spectators fall silent in disbelief because the golem disintegrates into dust within seconds, and even the examiner struggles to hide his shock before finally announcing that she has passed the test. Rowan watches calmly with a satisfied expression because he already knows Sophie's ability, while Lucas loudly praises her performance, though he cannot resist teasing her slightly by claiming she looked a little rusty, which is Lucas language for saying she did great, but he still wants to sound cooler. Moments later, Lucas himself enters the arena, announcing that everyone should watch carefully because he will demonstrate how the exam is really done, which is a very bold claim considering Rowan just turned a golem into pudding a few minutes earlier. As soon as the test begins, Lucas leaps forward with tremendous strength and delivers a single powerful strike that splits the golem in half while completely destroying its core, which ends the battle instantly. Lucas proudly stands in the arena admiring his own work, while the horrified examiner quietly notes that this is now the third candidate who defeats the golem with overwhelming force. Later, Rowan stays Lucas's home, and during dinner, Lucas complains about the food like a spoiled child, which immediately earns him a light smack from his father, who reminds him that he is too old to be picky about dinner. While Rowan quietly watches this scene with mild amazement, because the family's playful arguments feel strangely comforting. Oscar then admits he always believed Rowan was talented but never expected to witness such extraordinary magic during the exam. With a satisfied smile, Oscar tells him that the real challenge will begin in the second round, and Rowan calmly agrees, because if the first test was simply a warm-up, then the next stage will finally reveal whether the future members of the Union truly deserve their place. 1 week later, the second round of the Union examination finally arrives, and Rowan stands calmly in the arena, facing his next opponent. While several observers watch from a distance, discussing how unusual it is that so many applicants passed the first stage this year because the Union normally eliminates most candidates very quickly, yet somehow this group produced several outstanding fighters, and among them Rowan is already being called the brightest student to graduate from the academy. One of the men watching confirms that the boy standing there is indeed Rowan, who is currently taking the second test, which makes the other man curious because a prodigy like him should already have drawn the attention of many instructors. Rowan, meanwhile, quietly studies the person standing opposite him, and at first he feels relieved that he does not have to fight Lucas or Sophie because competing against friends would make the situation awkward, yet his expression suddenly changes when he recognizes the opponent standing before him. His eyes widen slightly as he remembers the man from earlier during the first examination, because this is the same person who stood among the spectators, analyzing Sophie's sword technique with impressive knowledge, which immediately tells Rowan that the man must be quite skilled. Rowan politely greets him and mentions that he remembers hearing his explanation about the sword style and that he would like to learn from someone with such deep understanding. Yet the man looks at him with confusion because he cannot remember Rowan at all and simply pulls out his sword while stating that since Rowan is now a graduate, he will gladly teach him a lesson through combat. The examiner signals for the match to begin, and the moment the fight starts, something unbelievable happens because within a single instant, the man's sword suddenly flies out of his hand and falls to the ground before he even manages to take a proper step forward. The man stands there completely puzzled, wondering what just happened, while Rowan quietly raises his hand, revealing that he is using magic to control the weapon from a distance, which leaves the opponent baffled and slightly embarrassed. The man angrily demands that Rowan wait while he processes what just occurred, and Rowan calmly lifts a finger, causing the sword to float into the air above them, as if gravity itself has decided to take a break. The examiner politely asks the opponent whether he wishes to continue the fight, but the man refuses to back down because his pride cannot accept being toyed with by a young boy, and he declares that he can defeat Rowan even without a weapon. Unfortunately, the moment he steps forward, Rowan gently moves his finger again, and the floating sword suddenly shoots toward the man like a guided arrow, forcing him backward before striking him and knocking him off his feet. The arena becomes silent as Rowan calmly stands beside the fallen opponent, who now lies on the ground stunned by the humiliating defeat. While the examiner struggles to understand how this boy casually manipulates magic with such effortless precision, the examiner finally announces Rowan as the winner and instructs him to prepare for the next stage, while Rowan smiles politely and thanks his opponent for what he calls a good match, even though the battle ended faster than most people blink. Several days later, Rowan receives a letter confirming that the final stage of the examination is approaching, and as he prepares for the last test, he begins reflecting on all his previous battles, realizing that his fighting style has remained mostly the same for years because he always waits for opponents to attack first before turning the situation around. He begins wondering whether he should start developing new techniques instead of relying entirely on instinct, because once he joins the Union, he will need to grow stronger and adapt to far more dangerous situations. While thinking about this, he suddenly remembers his mysterious bird companion and wonders where the strange creature has disappeared again, since the owl often vanishes without leaving any trace of mana. Just as Rowan is thinking about it, the small black bird suddenly flies toward him from nowhere, which makes him laugh with relief because the creature seems to appear only when he is alone, as if it possesses some strange ability to move between worlds. Rowan gently holds the bird in his hand, while wondering whether it truly is an owl or some unknown magical creature, because whenever it disappears, there is absolutely no magical trace left behind, as if it simply slips into another dimension. He tells the bird that once he officially joins the union, he will try to find a way to communicate with it properly, which seems to make the creature happy, and at that moment, Sophie arrives and reminds him that the interview stage is about to begin, so they head toward the union building, where the final candidates are waiting nervously. Inside, they discover that only 50 applicants have been selected for the interview, which makes Sophie grateful that several familiar faces managed to reach this stage. Candidates slowly enter the interview room one by one, while some return quickly and others take much longer, which makes everyone wonder what exactly the examiners are discussing inside. Eventually, Rowan's name is called, and he walks toward the entrance, noticing that the large gate reacts to the mana of those approaching, which fascinates him, though he decides to examine it another time. When he enters the room, he initially sees no one inside and begins wondering whether the interviewers have not arrived yet, but suddenly a voice calls to him from behind, asking him to come forward. Following the voice, Rowan opens another door, and the moment he steps inside, he freezes because the chamber is filled with an overwhelming amount of mana, and in the center of the room stands a mysterious woman with an appearance similar to an elf, who quietly calls him closer while covering her eyes, as if even looking directly at him might reveal something dangerous. Rowan stands quietly inside the chamber, where the mysterious elf-like woman greets him with a calm, welcoming presence. And for a moment he struggles to understand that the gentle voice he heard earlier truly belongs to her, because the mana surrounding her feels unlike anything he has ever experienced before, since it is unbelievably pure, dense, and steady while at the same time warm and comforting, which immediately tells Rowan that the person sitting before him is someone who has reached the absolute peak of magical power that he once believed only existed in legends, and for a brief moment, he cannot stop wondering whether he might someday reach such a level himself. The woman politely invites him to sit and offers him tea, and Rowan carefully takes the seat across from her while trying to calm his thoughts because he suddenly remembers that the person before him is none other than the governor of the union, the most powerful and respected figure within the entire organization, which makes the meeting feel even more surreal. They quietly drink tea together, and the governor then gently explains that Rowan's unique body constitution prevents him from storing mana in the same way other people can, which must have made his journey far more difficult than most, and she softly adds that such a path can often feel lonely, which causes Rowan to fall silent because he has never truly thought about it in that way. He realizes that despite all the challenges, he never felt alone because his life was always filled with friends, teachers, and people who cared about him, yet hearing someone acknowledge the hidden hardship behind his growth feels strangely overwhelming. The governor continues speaking kindly, telling him that despite those obstacles, he still grew into a strong person with a sincere heart, and for the first time, Rowan feels that someone truly understands the quiet struggles of his past, which unexpectedly brings tears to his eyes. Rowan quickly wipes them away, wondering why such simple kindness affects him so deeply, while the governor gently reassures him that although his body may lack certain advantages, his heart remains honest, generous, and compassionate, which she believes is far more valuable. She then calmly points toward the small bird sitting nearby, mentioning that Rowan is also accompanied by a rather unusual little friend, which instantly surprises him because he never sensed the owl appearing beside them. Looking upward, Rowan notices that the bird is sitting quietly on the table, perfectly calm, which is unusual for the mysterious creature, and the governor smiles softly while commenting that it is a fascinating owl. Rowan begins wondering whether she truly knows everything about him, including the strange vision he once saw of the future, so he carefully asks whether such visions truly represent destiny or something else. The governor pauses thoughtfully before explaining that the future is never fixed, because every choice and every action creates new possibilities, meaning that even if Rowan glimpsed a possible future, it is only one path among many, and his own will ultimately decide which future becomes reality. Hearing this explanation brings Rowan great relief because he realizes that the frightening future he once imagined does not have to happen if he continues working toward a better path, just as humanity has always done throughout history. The governor smiles, seeing that Rowan finally understands, and encourages him to keep walking the path he believes in. The next day, Rowan visits Oscar's house, where a celebratory meal is prepared as Lucas, Rowan, and Sophie has made it to the Union. During dinner, Sophie asks where they will be assigned within the Union, and Oscar explains that the final placements are usually decided during the interview stage. Only 10 applicants pass the entire examination, including the 3 of them, who also happen to be graduates from the Union Academy. Soon afterward, the 3 new members arrive at the Union Administration Building, where guards respectfully check their identities. Inside, they are guided to a large chamber filled with heat sparks and the constant sound of metal striking metal, because every Union member must receive a weapon specially crafted for them by the organization's master blacksmith. The man responsible is a dwarf named Mr. Alik, who carefully observes each of them while explaining that their weapons must match their fighting style perfectly. Lucas confidently chooses a longsword, and when he demonstrates a swing, Mr. Alik immediately notices several improvements that could make the weapon heavier, sharper, and more balanced for his strength. Sophie demonstrates her rapid sword technique next, and the blacksmith praises her excellent balance and footwork, while suggesting that she expand her style by combining a shield with her sword, which surprises her, though she agrees to consider the idea. Finally, Rowan steps forward, and the dwarf studies him closely for a moment before asking a simple but important question: is he a mage? Ulrich asks if Rowan is a mage, so he confirms it. In that case, Ulrich says he should make something suitable for that, but Rowan says he'd like to ask for something else instead, since he's the protagonist. He explains that he hasn't wanted a weapon he'll have to hold in his hand, so he's been using telekinesis to control these sword shards. He asks if it's possible to repair these shards, so the Ulrich takes a look at them and says Rowan is quite the interesting one, since he's carrying around a demonic sword infused with dark mana. He says it's no longer useful as a normal sword, but if reforged, it could be used as up to 12 blades. However, he tells Rowan to not get excited just yet, since it may sound easy in theory, but it requires a very tricky process. He explains that when breaking the sword, each piece must hold the same amount of mana perfectly. If done carelessly, the artifact could be destroyed, and it would take a 4, class mage or higher, quite a bit of time. Rowan asks if 4 class magic is enough, and decides to give it a try. Surprised, Ulrich remarks that this isn't something even a top union graduate could pull off so easily, and wonders if Rowan is just overconfident or if he really does have the skill. He decides to see how he does, and inwardly says he'll take full responsibility even if he fails. Rowan remarks that he can feel it, that day, within the insight Pauline's mother had taught him, the countless branches of mana spreading out. He guides the flow gently, like he's touching each strand, then applies Director Lazaros's unique magic. He senses that the key is evenly distributing the embedded mana into 12 shards, and finally fixes it. Ulrich is stunned to see that he's really using 4 class magic and can't believe the size and mana capacity are all perfectly identical. Later, it's announced that full-fledged preliminary training will now begin, and the teacher explains that the Union consists of 7 divisions: creed, harmony, honor, stability, utility, duty, and liberty. They will be assigned to one of these and start carrying out their missions. Their starting rank will be Oz, and only through merit, achievement, and skill can they be promoted to runner, seeker, expert, and master. However, the world won't go easy on them. They'll be the target of countless threats just by bearing the Union's name, and even the people they try to help may call the kingdom's dogs behind their backs. Still, they should not waver and should move forward with steadfast resolve as they exist solely for the kingdom's peace and the safety of its people. Now, he says they will announce the divisions the new recruits will be assigned to. A week later, Ulrich gives Rowan a pouch and says he can merge them with mana and should just call it Cheville. Rowan tells Lucas they should get going, remarking that Lucas ended up assigned to Creed Division where his dad is the deputy director. Rowan and Lucas watch their seniors before a voice says the new recruits they've been waiting for are here. Adrian, the leader of Creed Division, approaches them and cheerily welcomes them, saying he was just getting bored. He tells Rowan he wants to see his skills up close and introduces them to Oscar, deputy director of Creed Division. Lucas worryingly asks if they're really dueling all of a sudden like this, so Oscar asks if there's ever a right time for battle. He faces off against Rowan, saying it's been 5 years since he first saw him control his sword with telekinesis, so he's curious to see how much he's grown since then. Rowan says he's curious as well, so Oscar says a match with him will require more than just words, and recognizes Cheville as Ulrich's work. Rowan says he wants to test their power too, and asks if he can have the first move, so Oscar sees that he has a plan, and warns that he won't forgive a sloppy imitation. Rowan attacks, so Oscar says it's a bit rough, but it'll be a powerful weapon with a bit of practice. He rushes forward to attack and declares that Rowan is still far from being able to match his strength. "I believe you, man. It's not like he's the literal main character." Rowan remarks that he can't face Oscar's sword at this speed, so the best he can do right now is slow down the blade. Oscar is completely stopped mid-lunge, as Rowan remarks that he manipulated friction, weight, and surface tension to hold it in place. Oscar inwardly says he's picked up some new tricks, but little tricks like that won't stop his blade because he's not strong enough. However, Rowan's able to completely block his attack with Cheville and remarks that his mana is too weak to completely restrain Oscar. He can reconfigure Cheville without issue, but there's no room to retreat, so he'll just have to break through head-on. He attacks Oscar with a fireball, and quickly apologizes when he realizes his beard got singed, but Adrian starts laughing while the other seniors admit Rowan's not half bad. They agree that he's still rough when it comes to actual combat, and toning down the fireball earlier was too polite of him. Adrian tells Rowan that was an interesting maneuver, and commends him for blocking and dodging Oscar's attacks so naturally. He tells Rowan to not rush, even if he's not quite there yet, since he's well prepared for what's ahead. He asks Sienna to help Rowan grow even further, and tells Lucas it's his turn to go up against Oscar. Later, Sienna tells Rowan there's something they need to go over from the earlier match, and says his magic is excellent, but he's weak in close combat. Right now, if he can't maintain distance from his opponent, he'll struggle to gain the upper hand. She warns Rowan that giving up space in a duel like that is dangerous, and shows that how you use your feet is important. That can be interpreted very differently. Rowan is surprised by how light Sienna's footwork is, and remarks that even though it's just a mock spar, her movement against the mana flow looks completely natural, which isn't something that he can be trained in just a day. Sienna tells him it'll take time for his body to follow, even if he tries to learn it immediately, so he shouldn't rush it until he's mastered it. However, Rowan imagines Oscar's movement form the duel. He starts emulating the proper movement in that kind of situation, and admits the difference in mana will decide the outcome since he's using ranged magic to control the opponent's movement. Now that he's in the Union, he tells himself that he has to assume every opponent is stronger than him. Sienna says it looks like something's clicked for him, so he admits this isn't something he can do. Sienna wonders if she misjudged him all this time since he's giving up so quick, and says it just sounds like he's whining. Rowan is thinking of controlling the air in front of him, but he suddenly comes up with an idea for an invisible barrier. Rowan remarks that he can replicate the Azure Flame Barrier miss. Arthur showed him in part, and if he can't stop his enemy from entering his space, this method might be the closest thing to the answer he's been seeking. Controlling the trajectory and neutralizing the enemy's attacks improves the efficiency of his own attacks. After setting up his domain, he realizes he can see his opponent's movements, and tells himself that no matter the opponent, he must train his body to this breadth and speed to dodge them all. Sienna says it looks like he's found quite an interesting method, and decides to see it for herself since the lesson isn't over yet. She lunges forward to attack and asks what spell he's using since she's feeling unusually heavy. She admits he almost lost his breath for a second, so this might work in a real fight, but Rowan says he's still not good enough to catch up with him. Sienna says insight comes from understanding your flaws, but he should be more forgiving to himself, judging from his speed and breathing just now. Rowan asks Sienna to teach him one more thing. Later, Sienna meets Adrian and Oscar, and Adrian says Rowan seems to have overcome the usual mage weaknesses. Sienna admits she didn't really do anything special, so Adrian says they should teach him something too to save face, but Sienna's compatibility with Rowan is the best. In that sense, he asks Sienna to take Rowan with her on a light recon mission, revealing that the vice commander cleaned out the retail farm before and is starting a new business. Sophie tells Lucas and Rowan it's nice that they can already go on missions, since she was placed alone in the 4th unit and has been assigned to the Honor Guard. The Honor Guard is a combat unit mainly composed of mages and magic swordsmen, and they mainly protect other mages. Sophie didn't like it, but it might actually suit her better. Rowan suggests that she could get some help from the senior members of the Honor Guard, since they all seem really nice. Lucas wonders if he doesn't realize people are only kind to him, or if he's just pretending to not know. So Rowan points out that Lucas spars with the seniors too, and isn't a totally useless side character. Still, Sophie says she doesn't feel comfortable asking the seniors for help, so she asks them to take a quick look at her swordsmanship before she goes, and Rowan suggests that Lucas could spar with her too. Watching them, Rowan remarks that Uncle Alric made that kind of shield for a reason, so it must mean Sophie should use it offensively too. Rather than blocking completely, it'd be better to deflect, and lowering her stance a bit more would be better. Sienna calls them over, so Rowan gives Sophie his notebook and says he wrote some points on what could be improved. She slowly says he didn't have to go that far, but he reminds her that they're friends and says he'll help her more when he gets back. She happily says she'll be waiting and tells them to take care of themselves out there. The group arrives at the small northeastern city of Olin, so Sienna says they should leave the horses here and go in on foot. Sienna tells Lucas to practice horseback riding as soon as they get back, since they don't want anyone holding them back, so Lucas instantly agrees. She reminds them that this mission is covert reconnaissance. The city of Olin in Grafton Kingdom is a key transport hub, but it's been neglected due to political reasons. As immigrants from various countries gathered outside of Olin, it naturally became a haven for crime. To isolate crime from the city, Olin officially designated the outskirts as the immigrant zone and built high walls. Until now, they didn't care what happened in the zone, but with the danger spreading to the city, they can't ignore it anymore. She says they'll disguise themselves as mercenaries to gather intel, so it's probably best to split up and get more information. She tells them to not forget that safety comes first, since the quarantine zone is overrun with ghouls. Lucas asks if there's any way to turn ghouls back to humans, but Sienna says killing them is the only option and tells them to not go overboard, since it's just recon this time. Lucas unexpectedly calls her sis, since they're supposed to be mercenaries, so she begrudgingly admits that's fine. Inside, Sienna remarks that the mana density and pollution vary widely here, and the people are ethnically diverse, so unlike the Union, it feels dark and rough here. Sienna goes up to the desk and says they're here to apply for the ghoul subjugation team. She hands over her papers so the man directs her to a room and says she can join the teams right away there. Rowan manages to get through without any suspicious questioning as well and wonders who he'll get teamed up with. He meets a group of men who annoyingly wonder if a frail-looking brat like him can protect himself. They don't think he's even first class at that age, so he'll just take up space and cut into their share. One man says the number's right at least, so they should just go in assuming they don't have him and maybe he'll be kind enough to die early on. Rowan sighs and inwardly says he'll wear himself out if he hangs around them. They leave, and Rowan notices that the outer area looks like a typical market, even though this is a quarantine zone, and being closest to the outside means there's a lot of foot traffic, so this area is probably safe. He uses the air to gather surrounding disturbances and dull the senses, then naturally drift away in the crowd. He wonders how he ended up with such rude people and suddenly senses Sienna's mana. He realizes she's watching him and thinks it must be because it's their first mission and she's worried about them. He decides to not disappoint her and starts looking for traces of the ghouls. She won't let you hit, bro. A ghoul is a humanoid monster made from living humans, created by necromancers among dark priests or black mages. With superhuman physical strength, sharp and elongated teeth and claws and a tongue that extends like a snake's, they're said to feed on human flesh. Rowan remarks that he's only read about them in books, so he doesn't really know how dangerous they are. He notices that the inner area has a different vibe with sick, starving, passed out people sitting on the streets, and if someone died or disappeared, no one would care. He assumes that's why retails target this place and declares that they must stop this for peace and people's lives, for a world where happy smiles are everywhere and peace and stability last. He remarks that since the day he met Pauline's mother again, it's time to fulfill the vow he made. As Rowan is walking, he notices a man fighting a group of ghouls and realizes it's Lucas. He wonders if Lucas completely forgot about their recon mission and why he's just standing there. A pair of ghouls are about to approach him, but they get scared and hurriedly run away, so Rowan goes after one of them, since it must have thought fleeing or calling for help was the right choice in this instance. The gap between Lucas and the ghoul widens, and he inwardly admits he can't go any faster than this with his mana. Before it can get further, he attacks it with Shovel to ensure that it leaves blood drops on the ground that Rowan can follow. As Rowan follows the trailer, he says he should have learned a movement spell from Diego ahead of time. A movement technique allows its user to use the mana at their feet to burst forward and increase range and speed, unlike Blake's movement technique in the past. He sees that Sienna is still nearby and realizes Adrian was being considerate when he paired her up with him. Rowan remarks that Sienna's moment felt fleeting and elusive the first time he saw it. Like water or wind, it's hard to predict where it starts or ends, but that makes it free. Instead of using explosive mana bursts for propulsion, she steps on diffused mana and glides along. His mana might not compare to Sienna's right now, but there's already enough mana flowing around him to begin with. However, he decides to focus on what's in front of him first, as ghouls start approaching him. Rowan sees that he's arrived at the ghouls' hideout, and some humans have already been captured. Since none of them are dead yet, Rowan remarks that he has to quickly save them and starts easily killing the ghouls like they're bags of meat. He says the best aspect of his domain is that it can slow down the time of anything within its radius. Plus, the domain itself is sturdy, so it can function like an isolated mana laboratory. He decides to try that spell now and enhances the heat exchange to burn them all. He realizes the humans tied up are the people from his party. They say they may have spoken a bit roughly earlier, but he can't just leave like that since they went looking for him when he disappeared and got caught like this. Rowan lets them all go and asks how they got caught, so they say it wouldn't have been an issue if it were just ghouls, but there was a dark priest among them. They point him to where the dark priest and leave. Sienna appears and tells Rowan he's done well, but from here on, they're going to move together. He asks about Lucas, so she thinks he should be fine since he's causing a distraction. They decide to head out, so Rowan decides to try out the movement technique he was aiming for earlier. Rowan sees that Sienna doesn't use mana as he'd thought. It just looks that way because the way she uses mana isn't forced. She steps on the circulating mana and pushes off so it feels like she moves without resisting the mana's flow and direction. He admits getting lost is natural for a newbie like him, but he can't just stay like this and has to catch up to her, no matter what. He tells himself to reduce the friction and recoil felt from the surface. His foot touches and starts following her path, sliding over mana like she does to dash forward, like drawing a straight line towards a single direction. Sienna is surprised by how quickly he caught up and asks if he realized something, so Rowan says he couldn't have figured it out without her. He asks to handle the ghouls and swiftly kills them, but he senses that something's off since these ghouls aren't trying to run away. However, he decides to stay focused, and suddenly notices a dark priest in front of them who casts a spell directly on his own body. Rowan remarks that the priest feels just like the being he saw in his vision. The priest manages to deflect Cheville as well, so Rowan realizes he's much thicker and tougher than he'd expected. The priest is fast as well, but Rowan isn't worried since its movement should be restricted inside the domain. Sienna rushes forward to attack, seeing which Rowan tries to stop her since her blades aren't enough to cut through its hide even if she's strong. However, she swiftly slashes off the priest's head, and Rowan is surprised to see that she just used an aura sword. They decide to follow the trail, and Rowan doesn't sense any life around them before they arrive at Retail's stronghold. Rowan asks if that's Retail's main base, so Sienna says it's just one of their branches. There are probably several more inside the quarantine zone. They go in, and the smell of blood is immediately overwhelming. Sienna finds the magic circle on the wall, seeing which Rowan wonders if they really hid the entrance with a spell formula, and realizes they might be able to decode this if they break it. They break it open and find a shelf full of spells and books. Rowan finds a leather-coated book and questions if it could be made from human skin. He takes a closer look and sees the stone of geisha inside it, similar to the magic circle he saw back then. He tells Sienna it contains variations of a single magic circle and is a spell to awaken or summon some kind of being, like how the dark priest invited a demon into himself. He suddenly summons an owl and asks it if it was a demon, surprising Sienna, who asks what's up with it. Rowan explains that he bought a stone from a magic shop when he was a kid, and Owl was born from it. He sees that the letters are infused with murky mana, and it feels like they hold some powerful intent, a language that shouldn't exist in this world. Sienna says they should head back for now, since it seems like the higher-ups are ordering them to increase the number of ghouls, so there are more retail branches inside the quarantine zone. Later, Lucas takes down his 30th ghoul and cheerily sees Sienna and Rowan. Sienna commends him since the investigation went smoothly and tells him to join them as they head to Allen City Hall. As they're walking, Lucas notices some stuff floating near Rowan and asks what that is, so he says it's the head of a dark priest and the tongue of a ghoul. Since he figured they'd need evidence to be recognized for completing the mission, doesn't mean he needs to make them fly all around him. Sienna agrees that he should put it away since they're entering the city. In City Hall, a guard asks what business they have here, so Sienna says they've come to meet the mayor. Another guard says the mayor isn't free enough to deal with people like them and tells them to go hunt some ghouls instead. He doesn't think they could catch even a single rat considering they're empty-handed, so Sienna decides to repeat herself. She takes off her cloak and orders the guards to take her to the mayor, revealing that they're from the union. An assistant gets them seated and asks them to wait here a moment while he brings the mayor. Rowan notices the thing Sienna is writing with is not an ordinary pen, since she's writing only with mana, without a nib. He decides to ask about it later, and focus on questioning Owl for now. He asks Owl what he really is, if he's a demon, if he's seen the spell formula before, and if he knows anything about retail. However, Owl doesn't give him anything to work with, so Rowan admits it's going to be impossible to get any information from him, seeing how he doesn't even have any memory of himself. He assures Owl that he's not disappointed in him and learns that he has a special ability. However, Owl unexpectedly reveals that he'll have to eat the ghoul's head to use that power. Rowan and Sienna agree to let Owl eat the head, and Lucas, who had dozed off, opens his eyes and hurriedly asks what the heck that is. Rowan says it's called Owl, and asks if he remembers the stone of geisha he bought him from the magic shop before. He broke the spell formula, and it came out from there. He explains that earlier with Sienna, he found a magic book inside the branch, and the magic circle in that book looked similar to the one on the stone of Gaedia, so he thinks there might be a connection, but he doesn't know yet. Lucas thinks it's dangerous then, and suggests that it could be connected to retail, but Rowan assures him it's fine for now, since he completely purified it. Lucas asks what the head was that he just fed it so. Rowan says, Owl said it can only use its power if it eats head sign. It can supposedly reveal the opponent's secrets. Bit of a weird power for an owl to have, but okay. Lucas asks if it can really do that, so Rowan mutters that he might be able to test it right away as the mayor enters the room. He apologizes since they've been waiting long and wishes they had informed him beforehand that they were coming. He introduces himself as Mayor Bruce of Allen and hopes nothing unusual happened since he heard they visited the quarantine zone before coming here. He notices Owl and hurriedly asks what that is, questioning if the Union keeps strange creatures like this. Owl suddenly sits on his head, and Rowan aims Cheville at the guards' faces, while Lucas points his sword at Bruce. Lucas orders the guards to not move an inch, as Bruce angrily says, this got troublesome and wishes he had a little more time since he would have finished cleaning out the slums. Sienna asks if he stood by and let Rettel create ghouls, so he says that was the only way to clean up that crime-ridden area, turn the slum dwellers into ghouls and then hire mercenaries to clean up the remaining ghouls. Sienna asks what Rattel gains from mercenaries killing ghouls. Bruce says that's an experiment of sorts since they said they were using mercenaries to create stronger ghouls. He once again wishes he had just a little more time since he could have wiped out all the trash in there. Rattel would have created stronger ghouls, and he could have cleaned up the crime-ridden areas. They ask if all of this was his idea, but Bruce says everything was according to her will, his goddess, Priestess Amy. Owl gets off of Bruce's head, after which Sienna says she's heard everything and raises her blade at him. She says she knows that he colluded with Rettel to conduct human experiments and clean out the slums. Stunned, Bruce asks what they're saying, so Sienna declares that for treason against the kingdom and for the crime of massacring the people, she hereby strips him of his position, will execute him, and will shut down Allen City Hall. Bro's entire life got destroyed because of a stupid owl. Bruce slowly asks what she's saying before Sienna swings her blade towards him. Afterwards, Sienna ordered the closure of City Hall. Everyone inside was bound, and those with tainted mana were singled out and interrogated repeatedly. Though no more information could be gained, it was proven that the mayor's words were true. Later, Sienna tells Rowan and Lucas they both did well. They'll rest here a bit, then head back to the quarantine zone. Rowan wants to ask her a question and asks about the pen she used earlier. She explains that it's a transmission pen, and he'll get one when he becomes a runner. Anything written with this tool is delivered straight to the Union. Rowan sees that it really was a magic tool, as Lucas asks Sienna if executing the mayor was really okay. She says it depends on the judgment, and of course, it's best to stop at just arresting when possible, but this time, she had to be decisive. If they had hesitated, they would have been suspected of siding with Rowan. Just as much as she trusts them, their actions must carry the same level of conviction, that is, the creed of their union. Later, Lucas wonders just who Priestess Amy is since the mayor tried to hide her until the end. Sienna asks Rowan if he has something in mind and asks if he suspects anyone, so he says he's not sure, but 5 years ago, when he was at the Dunton shelter, there was a person there with the same name who taught him how to read. Sienna asks if he's forgotten the Union's policy. He assures her that he remembers, so she tells him to keep in mind that there must be no grudges left in the world now that he's in the Union. Rowan says he'll keep that in mind and asks Sienna if she suspected it from the beginning since she went as far as disguising herself this time. He believes that even if they'd entered the quarantine zone openly as Union members and investigated, he thinks the information gathering would have been enough. She says it was to prepare for the future, since if it spread into conflict with Allen, it would have been troublesome. She reveals that 5 years ago, when she gave prior orders to the Conviction Council runners, it was the same as his case with Dunton Shelter. Upon thinking about it, Rowan remembers that a report was immediately sent to Deputy Chief Oscar whenever unusual movements happened. Rattel's atrocities are diving people into suffering fates worse than death, and after the human trees, he's using ghouls as well. He admits he had forgotten why he decided to become a part of the Union in the first place. Unless Rattel is eradicated, this will keep happening, so to protect the future right in front of them, they must keep moving forward. Sienna introduces herself to some guards and says the mayor of Allen has been sentenced to execution by beheading for colluding with Rattel, so from now on, Allen will be temporarily managed by the Union. From this moment, Allen's quarantine zone will be fully opened. Anyone who obstructs or objects will be considered Rattel. First, the residents and vagrants near the entrance and close to the wall will all be moved outside the quarantine zone. A guard hurriedly says there are ghouls inside right now and asks how she plans to handle them. Sienna asks if he's with Rattel or the guard, so he says he's with the guard and questions what she takes him for. Then, Sienna says it's his responsibility and tells him to stop them. As evacuation begins, Rowan says just evacuating the people near the entrance is already taking quite some time, and dawn is already breaking. Sienna suddenly says that was fast, so Rowan asks if it's Rettel, but she says they wouldn't show up making such a ruckus. Commander of the Honor Council, Magda arrives along with Adrian and other members of the council. Sienna thanks Adrian for coming such a long way and wishes he'd have sent word beforehand since they could have prepared. Adrian cheerily says they only followed the letter she had sent faithfully. Thanks to that, Magda came along as well, even though she rarely ever comes to the field. He bows and says it's an honor to meet her for the first time and introduces himself so she sees that he's the Rowan from the rumors. She says she didn't come here because of him, she's only interested in Rattel's magic book. Rowan summons the book, seeing which Magda remarks that his mana control is quite natural, like flowing water, and she didn't expect this level of skill. She admits she was too complacent and should have questioned the governor beforehand. She asks if the barrier is the problem and says they should just remove it. Her and Adrian get off their horses and he tells Rowan and Lucas to step back, so Lucas slowly asks what they're going to do. Adrian tells Magda to show them something flashy since it's been a while, so she summons a giant magic circle above them that starts dropping fireballs, leaving Rowan stunned by her power. Rowan is shocked by the power of the two commander and says that's not just simple magic, that's class 4 magic, the very top tier. From a massive magic circle that poured the sky, mana poured down as if it could burn even the soil, an unreal sight, as if an irresistible being at the end of the heavens was detonating mana. He realizes this is true, class 4 magic, before Sienna says his role here is already decided since he's of the Conviction Council, so he should focus on what he must do. She rushes off as Rowan remarks that even Commander Magda, with her overwhelming power, must have faced walls hard to overcome. Surely, like him, she once worked and learned under someone, and rose to where she is now. He tells himself to focus since this is the first step, and even Commander Magda is watching him. He remarks that always, until the very end, he'll give it his all. Rowan sees that he's not getting a magical reaction from the ground's vibration. Even the mana that was here vanished in an instant, which is almost a total annihilation. If even mana itself is extinguished, that's definitely Adrian's swordsmanship. Sienna says she'll join the commander and take one side, and tells them to take care of the center. As expected of Sienna, Rowan believes even Rattel must feel pressured at that speed. Since both the branch and the barrier have collapsed, it's certain Rattel will be shaken, so the strategy is to drive them into the center in that gap. They suddenly hear Sophie behind them, who asks where they're going. Rowan says there's an open space in the middle of the quarantine zone, and he thinks the plan is to herd them there. Lucas says there's no time to even tie his shoelaces, so Rowan says they need to hurry, since the seniors are the ones driving them. In the quarantine zone's open space, the members of the Union are standing together in formation before the walls suddenly break and the ghouls start coming towards them. Rowan remarks that there's no question that the one leading them on the front is Priestess Amy. She sees Rowan and says he's grown a lot. As they start fighting the ghouls, Rowan attacks Amy with Chevel, but she uses her own subordinate as a shield. Rowan remarks that the distance is too far and he used more mana than usual, so it's a bit tough, but his mind feels clearer. To launch a Chevel without hesitation means part of his mental wall has broken down. A ghoul is lunging towards Rowan, so Lucas rushes forward to attack it and surprisingly feels that his sword's lighter than usual. A ghoul is about to attack him, but Sophie quickly blocks the attack and annoyingly asks if they can get it together. Lucas apologizes, so she tells him to save that for later, since they all need to make it back alive. Lucas asks who said he'd just willingly die, and declares that he still hasn't been acknowledged by his father. Seeing Amy, Rowan remarks that his grudge still remains, and it's right in front of his eyes. Rowan starts running forward, remarking that the path is already set, but there are a lot of obstacles, so he'll just have to cut them down. He uses Chevel to swiftly slash through the goblins in his path, and says thanks to the Union members pushing forward, the battle situation is under control, and the remaining ghouls are nothing compared to before, so they should finish this while they have the chance. A dark priest gets in his way, so he frustratingly kills it. However, as he's standing in front of Amy, he realizes something is wrong. He can't feel any mana flow from her. Magda knows what he's thinking, and agrees that it's strange. She reveals that it's a puppet, a sorcerer's minion. Rowan questions if this was another trap, and annoyingly says this is also magic those guys set up. If it's a magic that makes it move like a puppet, there must be someone controlling it from behind. Magda says it's just a mere minion, and is using such subtle magic that you wouldn't notice even if it was right in front of you. She shows him how it's acting like a commander, even though it's just a puppet-like fake, and says it's about time they sort this out. She summons a beam of fire from her magic circle to start incinerating the ghouls as well as Amy, seeing which Rowan remarks that they're just vessels made by someone, and yet he wonders why she looks so tormented. If the one before him is fake, he questions where the real one is. Later at the Union Conviction Council, Rowan enters Adrian's office. Adrian welcomes him, saying he's worked hard, and says he heard it's been hectic since he returned. He tells Rowan this treatment is natural sign, he achieved great results, so Rowan thanks him and asks why he called for him. Adrian says there's actually something he wants to ask him, and reveals that it's about the owl friend that always stays by Rowan's side. Adrian says the report only states that he discovered the mayor's treason with his unique magic. The kingdom, administration, and honor council were all interested, but since it's unique magic, they won't pry too much. Rowan asks if that's really all right, so Adrian says it's hard to trace the origin of swordsmanship, and even more so with magic, but they can't just look into all of his unique magic. Rowan remarks that it's good that they didn't investigate Sign Owl would have been in trouble if they did. Adrian admits he was a bit curious and needs his help. Rowan asks what kind of help he means, so Adrian signals something to Oscar and asks him to show them. Oscar picks up a bundle and empties it, revealing that it contains several ghoul heads. Adrian suggests that they should feed these to Owl. Rowan asks why, so Adrian says it's just out of pure curiosity. Rowan slowly asks if he knows this is a possessed vessel, so Adrian says he's seen cases where a non-human entity is summoned into a body. The holy reside in the heart, demons in the head. It could just be a simple monster, but there's also the possibility it holds traces of a demon. He believes that Rowan giving Owl the head he took might be why it was able to use its power. Rowan slowly asks if he's saying Owl is a demon. Adrian says that could be it, so Rowan asks what he's going to do if Owl turns out to be a demon. Adrian says he won't do anything. Rowan is confused, so Adrian says there's no need to hate a demon that's just sitting quietly. Rowan inwardly says, that's a relief. So Adrian says they normally couldn't just leave it alone, but things did get resolved because of it, so he should think of it as a reward and do whatever feels right to him. Rowan thanks him for his consideration and says he's sure Owl will like that too. He summons Owl so Adrian sees that it's bigger than he thought. Its legs are sturdy and its head feathers are quite splendid. Owl bows, so Rowan tells Adrian it's saying he has a good eye. It notices the head sob. Rowan says it's asking if it can eat the head like some creepy freak. Adrian agrees, but Rowan asks Owl to hold on a moment since they're not done talking yet. He says he'll show them someone's secret using Owl's power and asks who's willing to volunteer. Sienna and Oscar instantly pass, and Lucas hurriedly says he doesn't have any secrets to hide, so he'll pass too. Adrian says using it on Rowan is tricky, and using it on him is the same since there's no point if he can't see it. Lucas asks if they should have brought a prisoner instead, but Adrian says that's useless since Retail's people don't share information with each other. The main headquarters location, high priests, the supreme priest, even the cult leader's information is sent mentally, so even if they extract information, most of it is useless. Rowan is surprised to hear that, so Adrian explains that they didn't choose it themselves, they're just following orders, and besides, they're all dead so there's no point interrogating them. Adrian says they should hear Owl's story now, since at this rate, its drool will flood the place. Owl says something to Rowan, who translates that it's saying, since there's no one whose secrets they want to see, it can show them another ability instead. It will lend its own mana. Oscar says that means sharing mana, and Rowan cheerily remarks that another part has formed thanks to Owl. He tells Owl to begin, and Oscar is surprised to see it swallow the ghoul's head in one bite. After eating it, Owl asks Rowan to put his hand in his mouth, so Rowan agrees since there's no other way, even if he doesn't like this. Something weirdly shaped appears in his hand, so they wonder what it is. Rowan remarks that it feels like a clump of tightly compressed water since the mana is tangled in a similar way. However, he can't think of a proper way to use it, but it'd nice if a wizard helped. Still, with this much mana, he thinks powerful magic should be possible. He suddenly wonders if he could try using Commander Magda's magic just as it is. In the grounds, a pair of Honor Council runners, Sarah and Miguel, wonder if the students are really worth consulting since they've called in a 15 tier as a magic advisor. They acknowledge that it was impressive that they rewrote a spell with telekinesis and fireball, but asking kids for advice is still weird. They suddenly see a huge water spell being cast in front of them as Rowan mutters that this is unexpected. At the training yard, Rowan says the preparations are complete and wonders how he should use it. The shape and properties are different, but he's seen a mana structure like this before, the one that was at the center of the golem's chest on the day of the Union exam, the mana core. For now, he'll treat this as a mana core and draw in the ambient mana to combine with it. Rather than increasing its size, it's more important to increase the mana density. He'll raise the pressure and limit the size to make it heavier, but faster and more powerful, just like the magic commander Magda manifested. Rowan happily says this is amazing. It surpasses the limits of his own magical power and is a power he's never felt before with this. The result of this spell is a completely devastated training yard, so Adrian says this is much more incredible than he'd thought. Miguel is soaked by Rowan's magical downpour, so he angrily asks Rowan what the meaning of this is and declares that they'd already be dead if they were hit head-on. Sienna asks if he doesn't know accidents can happen at any time in the training yard and says they're the ones who set foot in here without sensing the danger. Adrian says that's enough and asks what brings the Honor Division all the way out here and if they have business with him. Sarah says they've come with an official dispatch from Commander Magda to Commander Adrian, but Adrian can't read it since it's been soaked. He asks what was written on it, so Sarah says he doesn't know the details, but it was most likely a request for a consultation regarding Lutel's magic. Adrian doesn't think that would be for him, and says the only mage in the Creed division is Rowan. Adrian is surprised that a hag as prideful as Magda would ask for a consultation from another division's rookie. Miguel remarks that he thought Rowan was just an overrated 15-year-old, but the magic he just saw was at least class 4 or higher. In that case, it means his magical skill is on par with Commander Adrian. Adrian says this seems suspicious and wonders if she's targeting Rowan, so Oscar agrees that that could be a possibility. Adrian says there's no reason to refuse if that old hag is acknowledging their rookie and tells Rowan to go ahead, although he have a lot of his mind since they can talk again when he gets back. Rowan agrees, remarking that the fundamental problem hasn't been solved, but this is the first time he's drawn on such strong magical power at once, all thanks to Owl, so when he gets back, He needs to take another look. In the main building of the Honor Division, Magda tells Rowan he's late and says it seems there was a bit of a commotion before he came. Rowan apologizes, explaining that he was practicing a new spell and things got a little out of hand. She asks about this new spell, so Rowan says he tried to creating a gushing downpour of water after being inspired by her, which makes Magda happy. She asks if the spell has a name, and Rowan says it doesn't, so she suggests Fallen Fury since it's a downpour. Rowan says that sounds amazing, so she smilingly sees that he has a good eye and quite the artistic sense. Rowan says she's very good at naming spells and asks if she was behind Sir Arthur's Barrier of Blue Flame as well, so she confirms that she named it back when she was vice commander. He cheerily says he's always thought it sounded really cool, and he's also very interested in naming spells. She says he seems to have an interest in languages, in which case they'll have much to discuss regarding today's business. She asks if he can interpret Infernal, the language of the demon world, used by demons. Surprised, Rowan says he can't do it perfectly, but it's possible. She asks where he learnt it, so he reveals that it was at the Lutel branch office he visited in Allen. She's stunned to hear that he learnt the language of the demon world in that short amount of time. If there are any books to examine, he confirms that he can decipher them, so she shows him the ones she needs him to take a look at. She explains that they must understand Ratel's formulas to counter them, which is why they have to hurry. Rowan sees that these are books made of human skin, just like the one he saw back then. A while later, Magda asks if he knows much about demons, so he admits he doesn't know much else, other than the fact that they are a race from the demon world and that Retel and Brian draw upon their power. Magda elaborates that it's only been 100 years since demons have actually revealed themselves. They knew of their existence through the possessions or channelings of dark priests, but so far, only ordinary demons have appeared. None have shown themselves directly. Rowan doesn't understand what she means by ordinary demons, so she says it's just speculation, but there are likely countless demons in existence. If you think about it, demonkin and demons probably aren't all that different from humans. Just as there are ordinary humans, there are ordinary demons, and just as there are humans with special powers like Rowan, there must be demons with special powers as well. If they continue to reinforce the formulas for summoning demons, one day, one of those special demons might just reveal itself. But before that, they must sever Ratel's roots first. Rowan decides to keep Owl a secret for now, and politely suggests that they also need a countermeasure for the ghouls. She says ghouls are only a threat to ordinary people. For someone skilled enough to join the Union, they're not worth worrying about. Even so, Rowan says innocent people are ultimately being sacrificed. He slowly reveals that he wants to find a way to turn humans who have become ghouls back to their original state. Magda says that is impossible. The ghoul transformation magic cast by the dark priests is akin to a divine authority. The human tree can be partially purified by Seong's divine power, but ghouls cannot be reverted. Still, Rowan says they can't just stand by and let people be sacrificed. If there is a possibility, their understanding of a demon's authority will also deepen, and it'll surely be helpful in breaking the demon summoning formulas as well. He says he will absolutely find a way and asks her to lend them the strength of the Honor Division. The next day, Rowan yawns, remarking that he ended up staying up all night deciphering the spell formulas in the magic book, but he remembers how even though it was a request from a rookie of another division, Commander Magda promised her cooperation. He decides to plan the next step since, if he's going to study divine magic that counters Retel's methods, it'd be great if he could go to Xeon myself, but to request a mission that far when he's still just an inexperienced Oz. He believes there has to be a better way, and decides to go back to the Conviction Council and report first. Later, he shows Adrian how much he's deciphered of the spell from the magic book, so Adrian cheerily sees that it went well. He says he still doesn't understand magic, no matter how much he hears about it, but still, thanks to Rowan, he can stand tall in front of Magda. He understands that Rowan must be tired after an all-nighter, but asks if he can check one more thing before leaving since they're all useless without him. Rowan asks what it is, so Adrian says they're tracking Ratel's main headquarters. He shows Rowan a map, explaining that the markings are Union bases built over the sites where Retel's human tree farms were destroyed. Then, Rowan believes there's a high chance their main base isn't outside these outposts. Adrian asks why, so Rowan says he's been thinking about why they placed those bases for a while, and it seems the outer bases were built much earlier, and the closer to the center, the more recent the construction is. The purpose of these bases might be to form a kind of encirclement to trap Ratel's main base, just like the sweeping operation they did in Allen, gradually tightening the net. Adrian agrees that finding Rite's main headquarters won't be that far off, so he hopes Rowan's grown a lot by then. Rowan says he'll do his best, so Adrian assures him he's already doing great and tells him to keep it up. Rowan says he'd like to ask for some advice, and reveals that he wanted to ask for a mission that would allow him to visit Xeon personally. Adrian says he'd like to grant it if he could, but Rowan's not ranked high enough to take a solo mission yet. Rowan says he figured as much before Adrian suggests that if he wants to learn about Zeon, he could visit his alma mater. He explains that Principal Gregor used to be an archbishop of Zeon. He tells Rowan he did good work and tells him to go on and take the rest of the day off. Before Rowan leaves, Adrian tells him an official from the kingdom will come tomorrow afternoon for the commendation and tells him to be here after lunch. He agrees that the Allen reorganization's been a headache and suggests that Rowan should take a few days off once that's over. Outside, Rowan remarks that it'll be nice to be recognized in a commendation ceremony, but it's not something to make a big deal about. Tomorrow, he decides to visit the academy and see the principal. The next day, at Union Academy, Principal Gregor welcomes Rowan and says he's heard all about his achievements and that he's made great contributions in the Allen mission as well. Gregor assumes Rowan didn't come just to say hello and decides to get to the point. Rowan says he came to ask about the authority of the Zeon Orthodox Church. Gregor says it seems his last mission gave him something to think about and asks if he plans to measure Retail's power through the church's authority. Rowan confirms this, so Gregor says first, he needs to understand what authority truly means. He explains that the power handled by the priests of Zeon is commonly called authority. At a glance, one might call authority a form of divine magic, but strictly speaking, authority isn't the power itself. It's closer to the condition that allows that power to manifest. Something mysterious, incomprehensible, whose source is hard to grasp, a miracle to some, blind faith to others, that in itself is what should be called authority. He admits it's hard to explain in words, and he'd show him if he could, but he's unfortunately under restriction, so that would be difficult. He shows Rowan one of the Archbishop's sacred possessions and decides to give him this brooch. He tells Rowan to go to Zeon himself someday and apologizes for not being able to give him the answers he wanted since he came all this way. Later in the Union Grand training area, Rowan sees that the crowd's already gathered and wonders where the senior conviction members are. He overhears some people talking about the rumor that the Crown Prince himself is going to hand out the rewards. Another says he's heard the prince plans to test people through duels and wagers and picks fights for no reason apparently, so he's not going to be easy to please. Rowan remarks that this could be his chance to go to Zeon if it's a match against the Crown Prince. Lucas arrives and asks if he's heard the news, so Rowan says he heard a bit and thought it'd just be an official, but this is bigger than that. Later, the Crown Prince takes a seat, so Rowan inwardly says his mana's light is unusual since it's bright but kind of murky. The governor enters next as Rowan and the prince's eyes suddenly meet each other for an instant. The moment the governor enters, the air changes and even Rowan's breathing feels aligned. Rowan is wondering how much strength and achievement he must gain before he can earn the governor's recognition when the announcer says they will announce the honorees next. He says the sword of the kingdom, the Union, rooted out Mayor Allen, who colluded with Gray and eradicated Retail's remnants, safeguarding the people's peace and safety. He suddenly calls Rowan's name, surprising him. Rowan makes his way to the stage, remarking that he thought this commendation ceremony had nothing to do with him, with people like the commander and Sienna here, so he inwardly questions why his name was just called. He greets the governor and feels the Crown Prince intensely watching him. The prince rewards him for repelling the Allen administrator's rebellion and neutralizing Retail's magic, and adds that he may choose one registered rank 4 item from the Union archives along with a bonus. However, he doesn't let go of the trophy and asks Rowan if he's really a mage. Rowan affirms this, saying he studied under Dean Arthur of the Union Academy. The prince says he's never heard of him, though he knew the beheaded mayor of Allen. He was quite an impressive man, and always brought the exact sweets he liked whenever he visited the place. He asks if a loyal man like that being labeled a traitor doesn't seem strange and questions if Rowan claiming to have revealed it through some personal magic knows about counts as merit. Rowan realizes this is what they meant by the prince picking fights. The governor says she personally recognized Rowan's achievements and asks if there's a problem, so the prince says he's simply pointing out what doesn't make sense. Rewarding a rookie who just joined with something like this for a merit he can't even explain is absurd. In this place where there's nothing to learn, he truly can't fathom His Majesty's reason for sending him here, so he'll have to test himself whether the merit is real or not. He decides to see if Rowan's useful kindling or just a worthless weed that won't even catch fire. Rowan faces off against the prince in the training area, as it's announced that the duel will be hand-to-hand combat. Some runners in the crowd discuss that the royal family's secret arts make them the master of all weapons, which seems to include unarmed combat too. They wonder if Rowan will be okay bare-handed since he specializes in telekinesis. The referee says they will now begin the instructional duel and remarks that it's officially under the pretext that the kingdom's second-in-command is personally instructing a new union member. But in truth, It's just the Crown Prince's nasty habit, a meaningless duel, nothing more than an outlet for his temper. The prince tells Rowan to show him everything he's got, and says if he can defeat him, he'll acknowledge the existence of his so-called special magic that exposed the rebellion. Rowan remarks that he still can't read what the prince is thinking, but from the flow of mana, he can feel a strong will to win. He decides to focus on how his body moves instead of magic. The duel begins, and as Rowan rushes forward, the prince is surprised by how fast he is. He realizes his legs are bound and hurriedly blocks Rowan's strike. He acknowledges that that's a neat little trick, but he's still just a kid. He tries to attack, but Rowan swiftly dodges, remarking that the more he sees, the more pathetic he is, lacking intellect and manners. He inwardly says a noble title like Crown Prince is wasted on him and decides to make him look the part. As the prince is gasping for air, he angrily asks Rowan how he dares to mock him with such tricks and suddenly uses mana overflow. Rowan says the mana flow's twisted because of the explosion and believes it's no wonder he's struggling to endure since he used up so much mana at once. He admits he doesn't have much left either and decides to end this with one strike since dragging it out any longer would be dangerous. Infuriated, the prince angrily orders for his sword, but the governor says this duel ends now and orders the administration to clear the area. The commendation ceremony ends here. That night at the dining hall, Rowan tells Lucas and Sophie to eat slowly since anyone would think they've been starving for 3 days. However, Lucas says it's to celebrate a friend getting recognized and questions how he could have refused. Sophie asks Rowan if he's really planning to go all the way to Zeon to find a cure for ghouls, so he says he's not certain, but he thinks Zeon's holy magic might help. She says it's far away and it's a small kingdom deep in the mountains, so getting there won't be easy either. Still, Lucas says he's got great luck and questions how the Crown Prince himself ended up picking a fight with him. Sophie says he's just twisted inside for trying to humiliate someone like that with the seniors and governor there. Lucas says it's strange and believes the prince could have anything he wants if he just wished for it, from secret arts to royal techniques, but it's probably because of that incident. Lucas reveals to Ro that the current king, Simon, is the late king's younger brother. The late king, William, was wise and truly a noble ruler. When he ruled, even Grave couldn't run rampant, and the world was much more peaceful. But the then crown prince, his son, plotted a rebellion, and Prince Simon, the late king's brother, tried to stop it, but in the end, the king was assassinated. That was around 10 years ago, so it's no wonder the crown prince was traumatized growing up in the middle of royal bloodshed. Rowan remarks that wounds from childhood don't fade with time, they only become clearer with age. Sophie warns Rowan that the royal family will start paying attention to him after this, and tells him to be careful since getting involved with the royal family never brings anything good, except for a promotion. The next day, Rowan says he's been busy between mission and the ceremony and hasn't even talked to Owl, so he decides to do it today. He summons Owl and asks where he goes when he's out of sight. He learns that Owl can't go to the demon realm anymore since Rowan's purified his mana. Rowan admits there's not much he can learn from Owl as of now, since it has nowhere to go and no memories either. He asks Owl if it could create another of those water element mana orbs from last time. Owl says he's not sure, so Rowan assures him it's fine and decides to eat something. He later goes to Rowan and asks for a ghoul head. However, before Rowan hands over the sack, he asks if he can watch over it if he's not doing this alone, and believes it would help more if the captain himself supervised, so Rowan agrees, remarking that he feels like he got dragged into this somehow. In Adrian's private training arena, Adrian says it's fascinating how Owl swallows ghoul heads. Rowan wonders what element will come out of his mouth this time, since they say the mana orb's attribute changes every time. However, he's surprised to see that it's the same form and decides to practice the water element spell that was incomplete last time. Before they start, Adrian tells Rowan he can take his place as captain if something goes wrong and he dies. Rowan remarks that he's carefree, but his skills are solid, so he'll aim to break Adrian's aura shield this time. First, spread the mana around to make it easier to handle, then control and circulate it. Adrian says it looks even more terrifying from down here, as Rowan thinks it should be more solid to increase penetration. He absorbs the head from the liquid matter and strengthens its cohesion to form a giant ice pillar. He admits controlling a huge icicle with telekinesis is still too much, and decides to turn it into a water column instead, to release it all at once. As the fog clears, Rowan shockingly sees Adrian's glasses lying on the ground, but Adrian himself is fine. He says it's good that the shield held up. He says he thought for a second that Rowan was actually aiming for his position, so Rowan remarks that he only meant to graze the outer layer of his aura shield. He's confused, so Adrian reveals that he jumped into his attack himself, since something was flying towards him, and it didn't look like ordinary water, so he obviously couldn't just stand still. Adrian assures him it's fine and suggests that they grab something to eat. Rowan realizes the captain's truly a monster to be able to take a spell like that head-on without a scratch. A few days later in the main building, Rowan wonders if he's overworked himself these past few days since his fatigue just isn't going away. That day, following the captain's advice, he fed Owl the 2 remaining heads and decided to keep the absorbed mana stored inside Owl's body. Since he hasn't yet confirmed what attribute the mana inside Owl's stomach has, he needed to clearly visualize how to use other mana types effectively. He's been thinking about it for days, but maybe because he hasn't slept, he was too excited to stop. He decides to test out another spell on the way back from meeting the governor. He runs into the Crown Prince on the way, who tells him to not disgrace the Union with his half-baked skills in Xi'an. Rowan thanks him and says that won't happen since he personally taught him that day. As the prince annoyingly walks off, Rowan remarks that he hasn't changed since that day, neither his mana nor his eyes, so his mana flow must still be unstable because of his emotions. He admits he understood something once he joined the Union. The world isn't entirely friend to them. After all, even the royal family who should be allies can't hide their wariness and hostility towards them. It's the powerless commoners who were kind to them. He believes the Union must become far stronger so that no one can challenge it, since that will be the first step to preventing the end in 5 years, and the bare minimum requirement to do so. Later, Rowan enters the governor's mansion so the guards can't believe a low-rank Oz gets a private audience when most members haven't even seen her face. Inside, Rowan feels like the mana itself is alive before suddenly meeting the governor, who asks if this is his first time here. Rowan hurriedly greets her and says this is beautiful, so she takes him to the Union's treasury where his reward lies. They head inside and the governor says everything here is classified as grade 5, so what she'll give him is in the next room. Rowan remarks that he didn't think much of it at first, but seeing it up close is incredible, and he now understands why people obsess over these. He suddenly notices a locket and recognizes the pattern on it, since it's the same as his brooch. He wonders if it's a noble family's crest, and senses that it's not particularly strong, but he feels drawn to it. The governor asks why he chose that one, so he says it felt familiar, and drew him in for some reason. She understands, so Rowan asks if she knows anything about this crest. She explains that the 2 large curves represent the tree that once supported the world, and the overlapping star inside symbolizes humans and elves, each other's sanctuary. Rowan asks if it's the crest of an elven family, so she says it's a very old family. Rowan thinks it might be related to his bloodline, so she says she's heard he depended on a foster mother at the shelter. He says he doesn't have memories of his real parents, but his memories of his nursemaid are still vivid. His nursemaid left him at the shelter and never returned. He remarks that he hasn't spoken about this in a long time, but it strangely feels easy to talk in front of the governor. He decides to choose the locket since it feels like a strong whisper is pulling him towards it, and he'll have to figure out what that is from now on. A few days later in the mission hall, Rowan receives a mission and remarks that this is finally the probationary assignment to Xi'an, but he and Lucas are surprised to see that they're being deployed to Barcino. He says it's fine since Barcino has the stabilization division, and over half of that is made up of Xi'an priests. He admits learning from senior Union members in the stabilization division might be easier than going to Xi'an. Lucas wonders how the team is going to be organized, and is bummed to see that it's him, Rowan, Sienna, and Oscar. As they head out, Lucas asks Rowan why the stabilization division is so hard to see around, since he hasn't seen them once since joining. Oscar asks how he would know when he skipped every kind of training, so Rowan says the stabilization division handles local orders and damage recovery. First, the Vanguard, Shinyum Division, is Unit 1. The main attack forces, Harmony Division and Honor Division, are Units 2 and 3. The later units, Stabilization and Responsibility Divisions, are Units 4 and 5. Sienna says this is Lucas and Rowan's first time going to another principality and tells them to stop chatting since Barcino is more complicated than they think. Oscar adds that they'll pass through several branches on the way, as well as Dunkton. They reach the Dunton shelter and Lucas sees that this is the place Rowan grew up in. Oscar mutters that he can still vividly remember the day he first met Rowan. A runner of the practical division named Boris greets them and says it's an honor to meet them in person. Inside, Lucas asks if the others are out on patrol since it's quieter than he'd expected. Boris confirms this and says he's basically the only one stationed here full-time. Lucas is surprised to see that he's managing all this alone, so Rowan says the practical division specializes in watching daily life and gathering information. If many people move together, they stand out. Oscar says they should get to the main point and learns from Boris that Retail has completely disappeared from Dunton and Liberta has taken that empty space. Liberta are one of the so-called graves that rot the continent. They call themselves a free mercenary band, but they're really just a gang of thugs. They're terrible people who believe ignoring order and following their instincts is natural. Liberta recently absorbed Dunton's crime group, the Manson Gang. Since then, they've been spreading their power all over town. Their leader's name is Balder. He's 17 this year, and trained in swordsmanship under a Liberta officer 2 years ago, before becoming leader. Oscar asks about how large they are, so Boris says they're still at a controllable level, but at this rate, they should be dealt with before they grow any further. He truthfully reveals that he met Balder 2 years ago. He was strong even then, but he was too young and he hesitated, which was his mistake. Oscar asks if he spared him because he was young even though he was a villain, so Boris admits he's regretted it ever since. They tell him there's no meaning in dwelling on something already done. They should deal with Liberta for good before they grow further. They open a map and pinpoint their main bases, so Boris says they usually wear red scarves as a symbol, so they should stand out easily. Oscar says he'll take point 1, point 2 goes to Sienna and Lucas, and he tells Lucas to be careful not to interfere with the mission with unnecessary behavior, and point 3 goes to Boris and Rowan. He orders them to keep in mind that they can't leave any loose ends, and they head out. As Boris and Rowan are running on the rooftops, Rowan remarks that it's changed a lot. He says it used to be a clean street full of nice restaurants and cafes, but it's different now. Boris learns that he's from the shelter and explains that the famine's been dragging on. When trade dries up and visitors decrease, streets change fast. He says it must have been a while since Rowan came, but they didn't even give him time to look around. He asks if there's anyone he wants to meet here, but Rowan declines, remarking that the ones he cared about, and even the ones who tried to use him, are no longer here. The sweetness he first tasted as a kid, and the sunset path he walked with Pauline's mom are all gone now, and this place, now exposed defenselessly to crime, is nothing but a ruin covered in the darkness of death. However, if someday they can restore the scenery of the past, someone's laughter will be heard in this city again. The door to the Liberia hideout is suddenly kicked down as Rowan enters. The members hurriedly rush towards him to attack, but he easily kills them all. A guy sitting at the end of the room says he didn't expect the Union to come here, so Rowan sees that he's Balder. Balder questions why the Union came all the way to a dump like this and if he's really famous now. Rowan notices a woman and her children cowering in fear behind Balder and angrily clenches his fist. Balder says they'll hear his business out if he manages to stay alive. He orders his lackeys to welcome their guest, so they immediately rush towards Rowan. Seeing all his lackeys dead, Balder admits Rowan has some strange tricks and asks when the Union turned into a circus troupe. Rowan says it looks like he's never learned what magic is. Balder tells him to not take him for an idiot and says he knows that much. So Rowan admits he might have underestimated him a little too much, remarking that the murky mana surrounding his body isn't something you get from basic mana training. He realizes Liberta might be borrowing demonic power like Retail. Balder says he didn't realize he was going to have to deal with the Union so soon, but he was planning to face them eventually anyway. He rushes forward to attack, so Rowan sees that he can raise aura too, and guesses that you need at least this level to lead a grave. Balder is knocked back as Rowan remarks that his body's well trained enough to handle that heavy sword. He's pretty fast for his size, and his stance is sloppy, but his reactions are sharp, although they're nowhere near Sienna. Balder frustratingly questions why his attacks aren't landing on Rowan, and why nothing reaches him. He's suddenly slammed against a wall by Rowan, and wonders if Rowan is saying his sword is nothing. He angrily runs forward again and tells him to not get cocky, but he suddenly realizes he can't move his body. Since this is his end, Rowan decides to tell him something. He grew up here in Dunton. To him, Dunton is just a workshop, nothing more than a small town, but to Rowan and to someone else, it meant everything, and graves like him are staining this place. Instead of people's happiness and the children's laughter that used to fill the streets, Balder, who plunged the city into fear and death, who trampled on precious memories, will never be forgiven by Rowan. After killing Balder, Rowan and Boris free the woman and her kids, so she hurriedly tells them to run away since Balder and his men had said Liberta officers are coming to take captives. Boris admits the two of them won't be able to handle it if Liberta's officers gather, so they should report back first. However, he suddenly notices Rowan reaching into Owl's mouth. Rowan reminds Boris that their mission is to wipe Liberta out. They won't vanish just because Balder died, so this is the perfect chance. While they're gathering, Liberta must pay the prince. A short while later at the inn, Oscar is glad to see that they've all returned safely and says there were only some low-rank grunts in the area he went to. Sienna says the same happened with them. Rowan doesn't instantly answer, so Oscar asks what happened. Rowan shows him a piece of cloth that fell from a Liberta officer and says right after clearing their hideout, they fought a group that appeared to be Liberta officers, so they freed all the captives and wiped out the officers. He says he fed the head to Owl, and they found something similar to Retel from Balder and those officers. They were all using murky mana, just like Retel, so Liberta might be using dark magic, just like Retel. It can't be handled so easily, so Liberta and Retel might have joined hands. Oscar agrees that they can't rule out that possibility and questions if it was the Union's mistake to assume they were only grave. He says they'll need to move faster. The original mission was to move to Barcino and support each branch in order, but from now, they'll change priorities. They'll split directly to each branch, restrain and suppress Liberta before they gather. Sienna is worried about whether or not this is the right direction, so Oscar says the branches were in Belia and Luter. Rowan suggests that they should split into 3 groups, like today, since that way, they could at the very least delay their gathering or break their momentum. Sienna is about to object since Rowan and Lucas are still inexperienced, but Oscar asks how he thinks they should be divided. Rowan says Oscar and Sienna should each take a branch while he and Lucas move to the stability division. Oscar agrees that there shouldn't be major issues since each branch has practical division officers, but they're both Oz. Even in the stability division, there won't be many who'll take an Oz's words at face value. Rowan understands, but says it'll be a little different this time. He shows them the Archbishop's relic that Principal Gregor gave him, and believes that if the Scion priests are stationed in the stability division, they will listen to what he has to say. Later, Lucas and Rowan are riding on horseback when Lucas asks if they're close to the border since it's really foggy. Rowan says they'll reach Barcino once they cross this border, and says there's no other way to cross besides the bridge. If they don't take that, they'd have to take a big detour south to Versa, which would take way too long. They notice a light near them, so Rowan says it must be a torchbearer, kind people who light fires and guide the way. Before they enter the bridge, Rowan reminds him of what Oscar said, no matter what happens, don't draw your sword. Lucas says it'll be fine as long as they run into Liberta, and Rowan agrees that there's no way something like that would happen. Later, a pair of Liberta men raise their swords at Lucas as Rowan wearily remarks that he wouldn't have let Lucas go alone if he knew this. 30 minutes earlier in the bridge zone, Rowan tells Lucas they should leave the horses here and rest for a bit, so he agrees. He sees restaurants and inns around them and says there are more people than he expected, so Rowan says there seem to be quite a few merchants and travelers. Lucas suggests that they eat first, and is about to ask what this place is famous for, so Rowan tells him to eat first while he goes look at the torches for a bit. Lucas agrees, but tells him to not be late as he leaves. Seeing it up close, Rowan can tell for sure that the flame isn't burning strong, it's slowly fading. The torch holding light and head is a guide that lights the way in thick fog. From long ago, the eternal flame has never gone out, no matter the situation. It was probably brighter and hotter at first, it's still alive now, but it clearly feels weakened. A man approaches him and sees that there's an interesting kid in the Union. Rowan asks how he knew, so the man says the material of his clothes isn't common. He's seen Union members wearing the same material pass by several times, which is why he thought he's the first person he's seen stare at the fire so intently. Rowan says it's really interesting since it's burning, a light of sacrifice. The man is surprised to hear him say that, so Rowan asks if the flame is burning using his life, through his sacrifice. The man confirms this, revealing that torchbearers like him burn their own and existence to light the way. To be exact, it's been 74 years, 7 months, and 26 days, but he has no strength left now. It's almost over. Until a suitable person appears, the flame can't last much longer. Rowan asks if it can't be continued using someone else's life instead, if it's hard to find a successor, so the man agrees. It'd be nice if it was possible. Rowan says he'd heard fighting in the bridge zone brings heavy punishment, so the man is about to explain this further, but they suddenly hear someone shouting nearby. Lucas asks the men from Liberta if this is the famous Liberta swordsmanship. He says he was wondering how great it was since they were bragging so loudly, but they're just children playing pretend. The men are about to attack him, but the man Rowan was talking to reminds them of what happens if they draw a sword in the bridge zone. They hurriedly say he provoked him first and tell the man it's not his business. However, the man says unwritten rules only continue if they're obeyed. There are no exceptions. He beats the 2 men up, and as they're lying on the ground later, Rowan says he has a good idea. He believes there might be another way to maintain the flame, instead of just sacrificing himself. Rowan suggests that he could use these men's mana as fuel for the flame, and the mana he feels from them is quite strong, so it would increase the flame's lifespan a lot, and would be a fine example of upholding the unwritten rules. Here, the man says he understands his intention, but there's no one here who can handle magic right now, so Rowan decides to properly introduce himself and reveals that he's an Oz of the Union's Conviction Division. Later, Rowan asks the man how he feels, so he acknowledges that he definitely feels lighter. Rowan smilingly remarks that the man's mana flow has gotten much lighter, so the flame must be accepting the newly gained mana well. He says they should be on their way and asks how long it'll take to reach Barcino. The man thinks it should take 2 days and says they'll meet 4 more torchbearers along the way. Before they leave, the man gives them a badge, explaining that it symbolizes their clan and is a gift for them since he can breathe again thanks to Rowan. If he wears it on his chest, other torchbearers will recognize him and he may draw his sword in the bridge zone now. After passing the first torch, Lucas and Rowan had to pass 3 more just as the torchbearer had instructed. Thanks to the badge they were gifted, they could draw their swords even within the zone, and as the price for the grave sins, the bridge sector was brighter than ever. Later, Lucas exclaims that they're finally done with the wretched fog as they safely arrive at the metropolis of Barcino. Lucas sees that the buildings here are all sparkling like they've been plated in gold, so Rowan says Barcino is nicknamed the Sanctuary of the Sun, and he can understand why now that he's seeing it in person. He couldn't tell just from reading books, but it's a truly beautiful now that he's seeing it with his own eyes. Lucas wearily says he needs something to put in his stomach, and so they decide to head to the restaurants. They talk about how none of them have seen the sea, but they acknowledge that the mission comes first. So Rowan suggests that they should stop the sea before they head back, once this job in Barcino is wrapped up. Lucas stops at a restaurant and says they should get their meal here since it smells really good. When they enter the restaurant, the people inside start gossiping about them and mutter that the union must be really desperate to recruit kids like them. Another adds that there's apparently a big battle coming up, so if you want to score big, you'd better stick with Liberta. Lucas angrily tells them to come over and say it to their faces and questions if they're not ashamed, letting themselves be swayed by such garbage rumors. They sit down and Lucas asks why Rowan looks so sad, and if it's because Retel joined these people. Rowan affirms this and says it looks like they really are the ones behind the child modifications. Lucas says it's amazing that they can commit such evil crimes without a second thought, and Rowan mutters that that's exactly why they have to work even harder. Their food arrives, and Lucas happily starts eating, so Rowan says it looks like there was a reason this place's seafood got so famous. They happily continue eating, but they're surprised by how salty the cured ham is, so a man explains that they aren't supposed to just endure the saltiness. They have to pair it with a biscuit to balance out the salt. Rowan thanks him and wonders who this man is, since he didn't sense a trace of mana from him until he was right next to them. He suddenly notices that the man is wearing an expert class badge and gets up to pay respect to him, but the man cheerily says they should eat first. Once they're done eating, the commander asks if the food suited their tastes, so Rowan says it's thanks to him teaching them the proper way to eat it. He and Lucas introduce themselves, so the man says he's Hans, commander of the Stability Division, and says they certainly have a knack for finding good restaurants. Rowan says they simply followed the delicious smell and wandered in, but everything tasted wonderful here. Rowan says he finally understands the saying, the best cooking is that which brings out the natural flavors of the ingredients. Hans is surprised to hear that he's read The Gourmet's Stroll Through the Continent, so Rowan says he cherishes that book a lot, and it really resonated with him when it came to understanding the world. This guy just throws words around sometimes. Hans cheerily says it's surprising that he met a fan by chance like this. Rowan doesn't initially register what that means, but he hurriedly gets up when he does, and remarks that he can't believe the author of the book he's read, since his days in the shelter is standing right in front of him. Lucas tells Rowan he gets that he's excited, but they need to get to the main point first. Rowan agrees and explains that they've been assigned the Barcino support mission alongside Vice Commander Oscar and Senior Sienna. On their way here, they received intel that the Liberta scum were regrouping, so they split up to intercept them. Hans believes those two should be more than enough, though it is a big surprising that the Oz were sent on ahead separately. Rowan shows him the badge he received from Gregor and explains that when he told the headmaster he wanted to go to Xeon, he gave this to him and told him to go see it for himself someday. Some people suddenly enter the restaurant, so Hans cheerily sees that it's time. The members of Hans' division suggest that they should get moving soon, so Rowan sees that they're seniors from the stabilization unit. Hans says he might need the help of Rowan and Lucas, and asks if they'd come with him. Outside, Hans tells his division today's mission will be carried out together with 2 members of the conviction unit. They decide to introduce themselves, so Oz introduces herself as Angela and tells them to just call her Engi, shocking Lucas, who says it's a pleasure to meet her. Hans says he hasn't heard why Rowan wants to meet the priests yet and suggests that they talk about the details while they move. As they're walking, Rowan sees that the land is extremely dry, so Engi says this is a place where life struggles to take root. That's why they use this as a hideout. According to the intelligence they received, Liberta is gathering near the city in preparation for a full-scale war. Rowan asks if they're planning to use that opening to rescue the children held in the hideout, so Engi confirms this. Rowan asks what on earth they're planning to do with the children and questions if they're turning them into ghouls again, but Engi says they don't know for sure yet. Whether they'll turn them into ghouls like Rowan said or do something else, she wishes it was something that could be solved with holy magic. Lucas is surprised to hear that she uses holy magic too, so she says she still lacks depth. Lucas says he'll protect her if anything happens, so she nervously thanks him and hurriedly says she needs to report something to the commander. As she walks away, Rowan asks Lucas if he's switched to Engi already, even though he said he liked Sienna. Lucas hurriedly questions how he can mock a pure man's heart like that and says he likes both Engi and Sienna. He's wondering who he should choose when they arrive at their location, Liberta's hideout. The members of the Stability Division notice that there are quite a few still left, so it seems they couldn't completely empty the place. Rowan remarks that he wants to check inside the building, but it's too far, and he can't read the mana flow well. Hans says the best option is to draw the ones inside out first. explaining that they can't let them sense the danger, so a small group should provoke them and make them move. In that case, Rowan and Lucas offer to go since the Liberta members will let their guard down when they see that they're young. Hans agrees that he does have a point, but says letting them go would mean deliberately using them as shields, which is unacceptable. Rowan says they were taught that the Conviction Division is the Union's vanguard, so they're simply trying to do what they're supposed to. Hans agrees, but says they can't go in alone since it's dangerous, and too small a number would only arouse suspicion. He decides to send 2 members of the Stability Division, Nikos and Bell, with them. As they're walking, Lucas asks if they use magic, so Nikos says they use their bodies instead of offensive magic, revealing that they channel divine authority into their fists and feet. Once they're in front of the hideout, Rowan inwardly says he can finally sense the mana inside the building, and there are more people than he'd expected. He tells them there are only children inside the building, so it'd be best to subdue them all at once. He believes the nature of Earth will work the best this time, so it's good that he received it from Owl in advance. He asks Lucas to gather as many of them in one place as he can, so Lucas agrees. He steps out into the open area so the Liberta men angrily question how the Union dares to underestimate them so much that they'd send a young kid alone. Lucas takes out his sword and starts gracefully waving it around him, wondering if Engi is watching him. The men from Liberta annoyingly ask what he thinks he's doing here, and tell him he picked the wrong place if he's planning to dance. Rowan remarks that water and fire are hard to use here because of the dry environment, so earth is all that's left. He finally divides the man and lets it flow into the ground. Like roots taking hold, it digs beneath your feet before blooming just like a tree sprouting its first shoots. He uses thornbone to raise spikes from the ground that stab through the men. Nikos and Bell watch in shock and wonder if Rowan really is an Oz. Hans says both the Liberta side and the other side have been completely dealt with this, so they just need to rescue the children now. He praises Lucas and Rowan, saying they've made their job much easier, but Lucas says they just did what needed to be done. Hans says they should rescue the children first, so they head in. Rowan remarks that he couldn't tell from afar, but up close, even though the children are small, their mana is turbid, so seeing how the group bypassed the front door where mana was gathering and went around to the back, it must mean Commander Hans also sensed the turbid mana. Hans opens the door and they walk in, as Rowan notices that no light comes in and there's been no maintenance at all. He wonders what on earth they're doing with children in a place like this, before Hans points forward, and they shockingly see children's corpses lying in front of them. Engi hurriedly hides behind Lucas and Rowan mutters that this is definitely Retail's doing, remarking that they must have told the children to kill each other. There's only one reason they put the dagger in the hands of children. They plan to leave only the survivors and sue them as Liberta's loyal hounds. Rowan angrily admits this is like the memories of that day when he couldn't endure his own wretchedness. What he must do has already been decided, and his chest feels tight despite knowing that. Hans puts his hand on Rowan's shoulder and understands what he must be feeling right now, remarking that this is far too horrifying for children to bear, but it's precisely at times like these that he must be more careful. The deeper the wound, the more easily evil seeps in through the cracks. Facing evil is never easy, and he's not saying he shouldn't feel anger, but he must not be consumed by that anger. He understands that this is difficult and is one of the hardest things about living as part of the Union. He mutters that humans are not that strong to begin with, and there are clear limits to what each individual can do. If controlling his emotions is difficult, he should share them with comrades who share his purpose, since simply doing that is enough to bring comfort sometimes. He tells everyone to keep the fact that they will rescue everyone without a single casualty in mind. They manage to save all the children, and Hans says they're fortunately not being possessed since it looks like the Dark Priest's foul magic and its traces are quite old. Rowan asks Hans if he can see the flow of mana, so Hans says, "That's an interesting way to put it. Just answer the question, man." He can't exactly see it, but the darkness or the evil energy holding on to these children is what he can feel. He decides to begin purification through his holy magic now. As his hand starts emanating light, Rowan inwardly says this is truly divine authority. Once Hans is done, Rowan sees the corrupted mana disappear as clusters of light start forming in its place. Hans says they should take the children and head back now, but before they can leave, Rowan asks if it's possible to turn ghouls back into humans through holy magic. Hans sees that Rowan must have felt something during the purification ritual and admits that is impossible. Hans explains that purification cannot reach the darkness within. Like these children, it's only possible when the darkness hasn't yet consumed a person's inner self. Rowan asks, even holy magic can't reverse it if that inner self is invaded, so Hans confirms this, saying holy magic borrows the authority of the great goddess and isn't a power that rewrites fate. The great goddess granted 3 authorities: the power to sense darkness, the power to hold light within one's body, and the power to bring forth light. Rowan sees that the power to pull out darkness that has already consumed the inner self was never within the domain of holy magic to begin with. Hans says holy magic can sense darkness, but since it cannot directly peer inside the human body, there is a limit to driving out the darkness within. Surprised, Rowan realizes he's had the power to look inside the human body since he was a child. If that's the case, he says it might be impossible. He asks Hans if he can borrow his power for a moment if they encounter ghouls, since there's something he wants to test. Hans remarks that it's hard to refuse when he asks with such an honest expression, and agrees. Back at Barcino, Oscar welcomes Rowan and Lucas, and says he heard of both their achievements. Rowan and Lucas are surprised to see that Oscar and Sienna arrived early, so he says things went smoothly thanks to them, since Rowan even gave a great gift to the torchbearers. He reveals that they also deal with all the Liberta members lurking in other branches, and the torchbearers said they'll block grave moments in the bridge zone for a while. With additional Faith Division members coming, their reinforcements will surely be disrupted, so he acknowledges that they both worked very hard. Engie interrupts them and says she came because she has something urgent to report. She states that Commander Hans has requested support since Liberta is currently gathering at the decisive battlefield, and retells groups and ghouls have also been confirmed there. Oscar stops Rowan, saying he understands his urgency, but there are procedures. Rowan argues that if they move even a little faster, they can save more people, but Oscar says this is not the Union, it's Barcino. By procedure, they cannot use force without the Duke's approval, even if it's for the good of the Duchy, so he shouldn't let anger guide his judgment. Rowan apologizes and admits she acted rashly out of emotion. They decide to go meet the Duke of Barcino, and Rowan remarks that Barcino's swordsmanship is famous for its depth, and they say he is its master. Even unarmed, he admits the Duke's presence is intimidating. The Duke recognizes Rowan and says it seems the rumors were not exaggerated after all. A sharply honed presence almost brings someone to mind. Rowan suddenly senses killing intent but says it feels different. It feels like longing, like a deep yearning for someone. Rowan apologizes for his rudeness but says he can sense the presence of a blade honed within him. One can feel the years he spent wielding the sword. The Duke says he's not at that level yet, but it's good to hear. He asks them to have a seat and says they must put out the urgent fire first. The place where they declared full-scale war is the Casti Plains. The terrain makes it difficult to employ special tactics, and the same applies to Liberta, making a head-on clash inevitable. With only the Barcino capital forces and the Union troops stationed here, they appear to be at a disadvantage. They admit they can't defend all of Barcino and must be prepared for civilian casualties as well. The Duke questions if they're expected to watch that happen, so Hans says the children they rescued in today's raid are only some of their victims. The Duke says he'd like to hear out the young Oz as well, since the older one gets, the more worries pile up. Rowan believes they must make their stance clear. Liberta has a strong sense of pride, especially when they think they're being looked down on. They reach even more fiercely. If they're outnumbered, it would be better to provoke them with a small group than attack the disorganized enemy together with the reinforcements that arrive later. The Duke sees that they need bait, but says even if Union reinforcements come, it'll take time, and the bait will have to buy that time, making it dangerous. Rowan offers to act as bait hearing, which the Duke starts laughing and says that's a request he's never heard before. He asks Rowan if he realizes that that place may be a grave, and says betting Barcino's fate on a Union boy is intriguing. However, Oscar wonders what the hell Rowan is thinking. Later at the Casti Plains, Hans asks Oscar if the other divisions are really coming today, so Oscar confirms this, saying the Harmony and Honor division are coming together. A while ago, Oscar asked Rowan what the hell he was thinking, so Oscar apologizes for not telling him beforehand. He says time was short, and he judged that he was the most suitable one to provoke them. Oscar questions if he knows what it means to stand at the vanguard in a full-scale war, so Rowan confirms that he does, which is why he must do it. He asks Oscar to please trust him, and presently, he's standing in front of a large group of men from Liberta who see that the Union must be nearing its end, since they've just put forward a single fledgling. Rowan says Liberta has trampled the weak with shallow tricks. Whether that is skill or strength or merely their cowardice in crushing the weak, he will see for himself. He says he'll make them an offer, and questions who among them will test their skill against him. A man questions why Rowan is bragging so much despite being a low-rank nobody, and says it looks like the Union's trying another cheap trick. He'd love to crush him right now, but there has to be some standard. Just as expected, Rowan remarks that he's just a low-ranking Union member, nothing but a weakling to them, so stepping up first against him would hurt their pride. Since the provocation's working, he decides to push a little further. Martin of Libera's assault unit steps forward and declares that he'll teach Rowan a lesson for his arrogance. Rowan says he'll buy them time until the reinforcements arrive, so Oscar remarks that he's counting on him. Martin tells Rowan his will-be last name he will ever hear, and asks if he plans to fight barehanded. However, Rowan says he'll fight with a sword and summons Cheville. Martin questions if he's really going to fight with a scrap like that, so Rowan says it's more than enough for someone like him, and he'll let him strike first. Martin angrily rushes forward, so Rowan inwardly says his swordsmanship isn't bad, high judgment's quick, and his fundamentals are solid, but compared to the blades he's faced, he's absurdly slow. He says he thought there'd be something to learn as Martin is knocked down. Martin hurriedly says he just let his guard down and it's still too early to decide, but Rowan swiftly kills him. He questions if there's really no one here worth facing him properly seeing, which the Liberta soldiers admit they can't dismiss him just because he's a low ranker. A man decides to step forward next, but a woman tells him to move aside. She says his movements are needlessly flashy, so she'll teach him a thing or two. She introduces herself as Carla, instructor of swordsmanship in Liberta. Rowan hopes she can back that up and inwardly acknowledges that she's stronger than Martin, as she says she'll show him that Liberta's blade is no lightweight. As they clash, Rowan remarks that Stance resembles Sophie's, so she might share roots with the Phobal family. He remarks that it's nearing noon, and the reinforcements will arrive soon, so he'll wrap this up quickly. He punches her in the stomach, knocking her down. He says her respect for the sword is genuine, and he'll acknowledge that she fights with full strength and without cheap tricks. If they value their life, he tells the Liberta soldiers to step back, since this is the last mercy he'll grant them. However, they say Liberta's brothers do not flee, not a single one, guess they're ready to die a meaningless death. Hearing that, Rowan summons Owl and takes a red stone from its mouth, remarking that everything's gone according to plan so far, and the only thing left is drawing out every last member of Liberta and cutting off their retreat. Then, they'll end it here, this cursed bond with Liberta. Seeing them from the front, Rowan admits that's quite a number. If this many rush in all at once, even the Union would feel the strain, so until reinforcements arrive, he'll reduce them as much as he can. He unleashes a line of fire in front of the Liberta troops. They hurriedly realize they need to fall back since the flames keep getting bigger. Rowan remarks that chaos and fear spread over the flames, but there is no mercy, their fate ends here. He wonders if the mana Owl gave him has already run dry and says there are still quite a few left, but this should be enough. Oscar and the others tell Rowan he did a great job since they were able to buy time thanks to him. Sienna tells Rowan to rest for a moment since the rest is theirs to handle. The Duke mutters that this is strange. The more he looks, the more someone comes to mind, and they look Alrique to an uncanny degree. He asks Rowan if they can speak for a moment when the battle ends. Rowan shockingly notices that the crest on the Duke's sword is the same as his brooch. As the Duke rushes forward, Rowan remarks that he's as powerful as Adrian, and his swordsmanship is beautiful enough to inspire awe. He annoyingly says he can't stand just staying here, and runs forward. As he swiftly kills Liberta troops with Sheevil, he remarks that their numbers have definitely dropped compared to earlier. He wonders if he remembers what Hans promised about ghouls, and suddenly notices a troop rushing towards Hans with a sword. Is he blind, or what? Hans is thrown back, so Rowan hurriedly saves him, and asks if he's all right. He offers to fight, but Hans tells him to stay back. The man tells Hans he has no business with him, and orders him to hand over the brat if he wants to live. However, Hans says he cannot hand over the Union's future so easily, recognizing him as Franco, Commander-in-Chief of Liberta. Franco says that's all the more reason to eliminate him right here. Rowan inwardly says the Harmony Division are here, and once the Honor Division joins, they won't be able to hold out. In that case, he decides to not let this opportunity slip by. Rowan asks Franco if he isn't just waiting for a chance to run now that things are turning against him, and says he heard he even ran from the 4 commanders. He calls Franco a coward for abandoning his comrades and running. Hearing this, Franco angrily questions who he thinks he is to spout such nonsense, and rushes forward to attack, but Oscar clashes swords with him. As they're fighting, Franco asks Oscar if this is all he's got, but he's suddenly struck away by Hans. Franco tells both Hans and Oscar to come at him together. Seeing them, Rowan remarks that he pretends to be relaxed, but he can feel impatience in Franco's blade, and he can see an opening because of that. To break through Franco's shield, Rowan pours all his mana into a single blow, and declares that what's needed is nothing but absolute victory. The balance of the front lines collapsed in an instant. Liberta's command could not withstand the pressure from the Union and the Barcino capital forces, and when the Harmony Division joined in, even the reinforcements crossing the bridge district vanished from the battlefield without ever joining, making it a complete defeat. Later in the Casti Plains barracks, Hans says it's fortunate that the wound isn't deep, but this is only first aid, so he must receive proper treatment after returning. He says there are some injured from the Union, but their wounds are minor, although he heard there were fatalities among the Barcino capital forces. A woman enters and learns that Franco escaped, but Hans says he won't be able to move for a while since he's severely injured. Rowan greets her, so the woman introduces herself as Ludia, captain of the Harmony Division, and asks for more detail on Oscar's wound. Rowan admits it was his mistake, but Franco fled with his weapon lodged in his eye, so it won't be easy for him. He wonders if he'll be able to retrieve the lost Cheville. Magda tells Lydia to not press Rowan further. He is a comrade who shares literature with her and someone she seeks magical counsel from. Magda and Lydia start arguing with each other before the Duke enters as well and glares at Lydia. She questions if he wants to play the older brother so badly, so he tells her to come to the Harmony Division once she returns from the Union. The Duke thanks Magda, saying the battle ended safely thanks to the Honor Division's support, so she says they were able to cross the bridge zone easily thanks to Rowan. The next day at the Barcino National Hospital, Magda asks Rowan and Hans if ghoul purification isn't something even priests avoid. Rowan explains that when he helped the torchbearer, he learnt something and intends to apply that. By flowing pure mana into the ghoul's breath, he'll drive out the impure energy from every corner, and they'll need Hans's purification ritual after that. Magda removes the gag from the ghoul's mouth, after which Rowan starts sending mana into its body. He tells himself to think of what happened that day, and to drive out the darkness, devouring the inside with his mana. As he's focusing, Rowan remarks that he can't falter even a bit right now because this is an attempt only he, who can see mana, can make, and if he fails here, they may never be another chance. As he's channeling mana, Magda starts giving some of her own to him, since the fatigue from the battlefield must still linger inside his body. Rowan keeps going and says he's almost there. It works, so Hans quickly activates his holy magic and channels it into the ghoul. It produces a huge beam of light, and as the smoke clears, they're shocked to see that the ghoul truly has turned back into a human. A few days later, the Duke tells Rowan he's sincerely grateful to him and reveals that his story is already spreading like a legend, so Rowan says he merely fulfilled the role given to him. The Duke believes his judgment in entrusting Barcino's fate to him was correct and says he had no choice but to trust him when he looked into his eyes. Rowan is confused, so the Duke reminds him of what he'd said before and says he felt it again during the battle. The Duke says Rowan truly resembles his old friend to the point that it makes him long for him. Hearing the Duke describe his friend, Rowan remarks that he can't quite grasp who he is and says he must have been very precious to him. Rowan remarks that he might have been able to look into it if he at least knew the friend's name, but he can't ask now. Rowan shows him the crest engraved on his sword and asks if it's not the same as the one he has. Surprised, the Duke asks where he got this, so Rowan says the necklace was a reward from the governor, and the brooch is something he's had since before he entered the orphanage as a child. He was told it is the crest of a very ancient elven family. The Duke reveals that this crest was used by his friend's wife's family hearing, which Rowan wonders if the people he's talking about were his parents. He admits he doesn't know anything about his parents, remarking that he was always chasing the goal in front of him, so he pushed those thoughts aside. The Duke decides to say no more since the governor didn't tell Rowan anything when she gave him the locket. If his past is connected to that crest, then finding out the answer is his responsibility. The next day, Rowan, Lucas, and Magda are taken to a famous restaurant by Hans, and Rowan is so impressed by the food that he asks the waiter if he can talk to the chef. Let the minimum wage employee do his work, man. An hour later, Rowan remarks that the head chef, Pelin Adri, showed him his entire process, which looked closer to research than cooking. He wishes he could organize his magic like this to refine it more clearly, and notices Magda standing in front of him, so he hurriedly apologizes for making her wait, but she says it's fine as long as he learnt something. Outside, Hans tells Rowan they've received a letter, stating that the governor has ordered him to participate in the second half promotion exam, which means he's been nominated as a promotion candidate. Lucas asks Oscar if his name is there, but he tells Lucas he still has a long way to go and tells him to train harder instead of being distracted. Lucas quickly agrees and congratulates Rowan. Rowan asks Sienna about the exam, so she says there's a written test and a sparring match, and you must pass both. Rowan remarks that he's come really far really fast, but he can't stop here. The time remaining until the end shown in the vision is 5 years, so he has to continue forward to become stronger. The Oz promotion exam begins, and Lucas says everyone must be pretty nervous. He tells Rowan to not get nervous even if he fails, since he has to experience embarrassment at least once in his life. They meet Sienna, and Lucas says all the 7 candidates are from different divisions, so it's basically a battle of pride. Rowan notices a guy glaring at him, so Lucas says he must be pissed because both he and Rowan graduated at the top of their class. Rowan asks if he knows who he is, so Lucas says he's Jose Del Camp, a 6th-year Oz who's a school senior and was rumored to be a genius since long ago. He's from a famous swordsmanship family, and his father was from the Duchy's Knight Order, so he holds quite a high position even in the capital. Rowan remarks that there was something he wanted to test, so this works out well. A while later, the announcer says they will now begin the sparring of the 7 final examination candidates. The first match is between Rowan and Jose properly introduces himself. Rowan smilingly says it helped a lot when they held back Liberta's rear guard in Barcino. Jose says he'll teach him a lesson since his exploits seem somewhat exaggerated, so Rowan says he can judge whether or not he can actually teach him anything after they fight. Infuriated, Jose says he can't let something like that slide and that they'll see if he can handle this. However, the air suddenly becomes heavy, and Jose realizes he can't move, as if he's being bound by invisible strings. Rowan admits Jose is no pushover since he adapted in an instant. As he dodges his attacks, he remarks that this should be good material for completing his spellbook. Jose asks if he's practicing against him right now, but Rowan says his swordsmanship is so precise that he's simply focused without realizing it. Jose says he'll properly teach him from now on and rushes forward to attack, but he gets punched away and wonders if Rowan could see his movements from the beginning. A few days later, after all examinations ended, the promotion ceremony was held, and it was the moment Rowan was recognized as having been promoted to runner. The next day, Adrian cheerily tells Rowan to come and have a seat, since he has something for him. He gives him a notebook and a pen saying it's issued once you become a runner. Rowan realizes it's the magic tool Sienna used, so Adrian adds that besides being exclusive to just the Union, it can't be used by anyone except its owner. Sienna says the writing is done with mana, so it cannot be seen with the eyes, but the intended recipient will receive the information clearly. He asks if he should just write and tear the paper off, but Sienna says they only do that for reports. Questions can just be written normally. Adrian tells him to write whatever he's curious about, and Rowan instantly thinks of the lost shovel, so he wonders where Franco is.